Hello and welcome to episode 245 of The Lookout Sir podcast, the podcast that has been going on for a while and it has been going sometimes on a solo show and sometimes I'm joined by some special guests, and today is one such day where I am joined by Tim and Richard for different segments of the podcast. I will be doing a solo segment where I talk about Games Workshop's fantastic new sprues and how they are designed and put together, and critiquing some of the instruction manual, as well as talking about some of the technological improvements that they've made over recent years. Richard is also joining me for a talk all about Necromunda. We're talking about some of the new miniatures they previewed for Escher and Goliath, as well as the House of Books, which is the new journal format that is coming out for Necromunda. And then Tim is joining me for a chat about Ogor Mawtribes paint schemes, specifically talking about the Undergut Mawtribe and coming up with a paint scheme and talking about how we would go about painting those models. So lots to talk about. So let's get on with the show. Like and subscribe and all that usual stuff. As always, you can listen along on your favourite podcast format or watch along, which is the now preferred method, over on YouTube. Go check it out. Let's get on with the first segment, transitional noise. In this part of the episode, we're going to be talking about Games Workshop's phenomenal sprue design and build instructions. A topic that is rarely covered, it seems, but it feels like Games Workshop's technology in terms of how it lays out the models on the sprues and how you assemble them has vastly improved, especially over the last few years. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into the latest kit that I've been building, which is the Ogor Mawtribes Army box set. And I'm going to talk about some of the instructions, some of the positives of how the kits assemble, and also some of the negatives and ways Games Workshop could improve some of those things. And if you're new to hobbying, some of this might be useful to you in terms of how to go about building an assembly. And for everyone else, fascinating critique and celebration of Games Workshop's success. Because over the last few years, I thought Games Workshop was already at a peak of miniature design and the technology couldn't actually get any better. But lo and behold, things have gotten even better and more fantastic. Things like skin has much more detail and texture on it, as opposed to just being smooth, as one example. So yeah, let's take a look at the Ogor Mawtribes. Let's start off with the instruction manual to start off with, and then we can look at some of the kits and some of the assembled miniatures that I've done as well. So in terms of layout, you've got some essential info, such as your base sizes, which you can just see here in the bottom left corner of the page. So you can see the different base sizes, and this is all to scale. So for example, I've got a base here. You can plant it over and go, this is a 40mm base. Fantastic. You'll notice it's also multilingual, so that does add to a level of complexity in terms of finding your language. And there's a lot of things in terms of keys and references, which they try and use icons for, so it's a bit more universal. And then they give you a breakdown of the contents, talking about the bases and the different sprues. One of the issues I had in terms of how they actually labeled their sprues is actually covered here, which I didn't notice before when I was building. So for example, the Tyrant, who's your leader, is Sprue A, and then your Iron Guts is Sprue B, your Gluttons Sprue C, and your Morby's Cavalry Sprue D. However, those labels are not on the actual sprues themselves. So if I bring the Tyrant sprue in, for example, it would have been really handy if in, say, a corner or where you've got the Games Workshop logo to have had the number A on it as well. So rather than having to refer to the front page of the instructions, I could have just looked on the actual sprue itself and gone, oh, this is part A. Okay, brilliant. That would have been really useful. So then on the next page, there's a bit of an explanation in terms of you can build different variants. And I guess this is where the pink and the green color options come in. So you could build, for example, here, one with a horn, a little trumpeter, or one with a helmet and non-trumpet, I guess, want of a better word. And then at the very bottom, there's a key talking about the different things. So one symbol with the exclamation mark is just saying attention to this point. There's the cogs, which is for your variants. But again, as I noticed above, they tend to be in pink and green, not blue. Then you've got a ×2, which is build a number of X. So in this example, it's 2. There's also a sort of a less than greater than symbol for build up to X. So that's potentially you could build up to this many. Then we've got the little 3 shields, which is for interchangeable parts. So you've got variant choices and things can be swapped over. Then you've got 2 little almost chevron-esque pieces for matching parts where these things correspond together. And then you've got another symbol which represents dry fitting. So I guess that's more test fitting before you glue it in place, I would assume. But it's not really clarified, so who knows exactly what they mean by that. I'd love to hear your thoughts now in the comments if you think it's anything else. Personally, I would also, at this point, I'd say, like an option where it's a symbol talking about don't glue this section down because it's great for sub-assemblies for painting, which is potentially what they mean by dry fit, but it's not particularly clarified. And if you've ever got a copy of the Hachette Partworks magazines where they have their build instructions, they do specifically call out, don't glue these things to this thing, so you can have the models in separate pieces, in sub-assemblies, paint them separately, and then glue them together at a later stage. So the Hachette Partwork magazine instructions do that slightly better, where they call out where to sub-assemble your kit. I don't think the dry fit symbol is what they're referring to there, for example. So if we briefly go through the Tyrant model, which I haven't built, but there are some variations. So for example, when it comes to the Ogre Tyrant gut plate, you get 2 different variants. So it's sort of saying pick one or the other. You'll notice that the variant symbol here, used at the top, is specifically for a variant build, not of variations that you can pick from. They actually sort of use 2 symbols to represent the same thing, but one is specifically variant model kit in terms of how you're building the whole thing versus interchangeable cosmetic options, I think is the best way to describe that. So often what you will do, you will start Tyrant with your 1, and then it goes 1A, 1B. So you'll do all of this. You'll assemble those 2 pieces, then you will have your completed piece, and then you will assemble more things to it. So, for example, 5 and A6 needs to be assembled before attaching that to the body. But what you'll notice is they constantly call out A1, A2, A5, A6. This corresponds to the sprue here, A. And as I mentioned before, this isn't actually on the sprue itself. So when you're diving in initially, you're trying to find all your sprues, and maybe like me, you've missed out on this page. Trying to work out which sprue is A is a bit difficult. So personally, I would have this lettering on the sprue itself in addition to being on the instruction sheet. So quite often what will happen is you will be building your kits and you get to a certain point where you then get your choices. So the Tyrant will get to this point where the body is assembled, you've got your legs assembled, you've picked one of your weapon options for your variant choice, but then you get to, attention, choose your build variant. So basically you get one with a kind of cape, like a fur cloak, and one without. So you've got to make that decision at this point, and you will have to note which version you are looking at. So for example, one version is called 1E, one version is called 1, which is odd because 1 is actually up here and F is down here, but this 1F correlates to this. So you will then go on and follow these instructions. I guess 1E is basically saying that you would do this. So yeah, this is where I've noticed the instructions sometimes are a bit confusing, because the 1E is effectively saying just do this section. However, even for the 1F, you also need to do this because the cloak is being added onto the arm. So the variant without the cloak is actually, you don't need to do anything. It's already been done. You've already done it. So not 100% straightforward. It does require a bit of critical thinking, I guess, when you are looking through these instructions to make sure you're going things in the right order. And then sometimes you'll have a case where you will deviate off, which I think you now get. So 1G, again, attention, you get 2 variant options. You're getting a pink option with a hammer or a green option with a giant halberd, I'm going to call it. So then you need to look at the corresponding section down below, which will give you your color variants. So pink for hammer, green for your halberd. And that will carry on through as you complete the tyrant. So there's different variants for heads, there's different variants for your back banner, for example. Let's talk about some of the other kits. So there's the Iron Guts, which are the sort of elite infantry. So they've got basically helmets that you can build up front, and they're the corresponding parts, and they're effectively all interchangeable with all the kits. You then go around building one of the models. So you are assembling the torso, assembling the gut plate, adding on some extra detail like the feet and the backpack, like satchel that he's carrying. And then you get to a variant choice in terms of how it's posed. So again, number 4, you will carry on with the 4 options, which will give you Iron Gut with the sort of halberd slung over his shoulder, or the number 5 option, which gives you just holding it in 2 hands. So again, you're carrying on with 4, which is the pink options, all the way down, and then you get a completed photo at the very bottom of the finished mini. And then there's also a little picture with the alternative head option there as well. Or you're doing option 5A, the green option, which is the variant build. So this model has 2 different ways of building it. And you don't really get to appreciate that that is the case up front when you are very first assembling it. There's no indication of what the finished mini is going to look like. You've kind of got to flip through to find the relevant place, which is a little bit confusing. The second one, for example, starts halfway down the page, and you start off again building the body, building the arms, and this one has a variant helmet and head option, but that is it. If I flip over to the other side, you can see the completed mini. There's no variant build for this one, which is a bit of a downside because this is a 3-man kit. There's a good chance you would want to build this at least twice to have a 6-man unit or 2 3-man units. Both seem quite plausible. And the other 2 models both have variants. So it's very odd that this one doesn't. But it just is what it is, I guess. And then likewise, so from number 7, you're building the last and final model of the Iron Guts. You're going down. And actually, forgive me, I'm wrong. This one doesn't actually have a variant either. So this one just has an option. I guess you get 2 different head options with either helmeted or unhelmeted, but the weapon is exactly the same. So what's very odd with this kit is that you get 3 models that you can see here, and only one of them has a variant pose. So if you were to have a 6-man unit, you would effectively have 4 models being duplicates, which is a bit rubbish, I think. I guess they're trying to save on sprues. There's only so much you can do with the sculpt, and that you could use ultimately the different head options to give you alternative choices. But overall, the use of the models exactly the same, which is really noticeable. When it comes to the Iron Guts, you get it on quite a long sprue made up of sort of 3 different sections. I'm sort of halfway through building my Iron Guts at the moment, so you can see some of the details and model parts still on the kit. And like I said, there's 3 sections. So there's one there's a middle sort of section, and then there's a 3rd section, although this second sprue is actually much larger with effectively like a bolt-on mini sprue. But you would have thought with the design almost of these sort of 3 sections that each Iron Gut would be on one of these segments of the sprue. So for example, all of Iron Gut 1 would be on this piece, all of Iron Gut 2 would be on this piece, then all of Iron Gut 3 would be on this piece, which would make finding the parts really easy and useful. And Games Workshop sometimes do that, where all of the models' parts are clustered together, so it makes it really easy to find. And on this, I think the torso and the gut plate pieces tend to be quite close together, but actually on this kit, they were actually all spread over. So some bits might be together, but things like the heads and the arms were dotted around. I spent absolutely ages trying to find certain pieces, and because you do have the numbering here, which you can see. And sometimes the numbering is quite clear which piece it relates to. Sometimes it's less so. Sometimes they're sort of tucked away up in a corner. And they're all very higgledy-piggledy. There's no, uniformity in terms of the numbering system. For example, it doesn't start 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't go along in any order, although in theory it could do. And if they did that, even if the instruction numbering was all over the place, it would actually make finding the numbers on the sprue easier. Because what they've done is they've ordered it via the sprue pieces. So for example, let's go back to the first Iron Gut. He is part 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, which makes logical sense. But they are not easily findable on the sprue. Whereas if this was part 5, this was part 7, this was part 14, this was part 52, while that feels quite random, if the sprue numbering was ordered, you could be like, cool, part 1's up here, part 15's going to be down here somewhere, part 52's right at the bottom. Maybe that would be interesting to see in terms of how they did it. But yeah, I think basically the sprue layout almost feels randomized, and it's because they need to optimize the space to make it as efficient as possible to give you as many parts as possible. And despite doing all of that, for the Iron Guts, they haven't given us variant builds of 2 of the models, which is a negative, I would say. But for them, it would probably be an extra sprue to have some extra variants, and that would cost more money, I guess. But it is what it is. So yeah, so that's worth keeping that in mind when you are building kits. And then let's look at the gluttons, because this was sort of the most fun for me to build. This was the first models that I assembled out of the box set. So again, you start off with lots of weapon options for the right hand and the left hand. And you can have, for example, on the right hand, you can have hammers or knuckle dusters. And in the left hand, you can have swords or knuckle dusters. And one of those knuckle dusters has like a little spike on it as well. And then this is where things got a tad confusing. So for example, you are given 4 models up front to pick from, which is a little bit confusing. And you get variants of up to 2 for each one. And it took me a while to work out what this actually means. What is the difference between up to 2 and just build 2? Because I think you can build this one twice. For example, the first one with the back banner, who's your champion, your sergeant. You could build him twice if you wanted to, or you could build this one twice, or 1 or 1, which is your combination of up to 2. And I think the confusing element here is that they're going top down rather than left to right, because I would almost assume this is one option and this would be on the right hand side the variant option, but it's not. It's the options at the top is the first build, and below it is the second build. And then on the right hand side, this is a completely separate model. This does not relate to this model whatsoever. They could actually be completely separate. And I think it would almost make more sense if they just presented you with this one option first, and then this option comes after you've built all of this model. And by presenting them to you up front, it sort of feels like an either or option. They relate in some way, and maybe, and I've not noticed it, maybe they have some similar parts that they use. So maybe they've got similar hands or arms that relate to each other, but I don't think so. I think they are 2 completely separate models. However, noting they are both champions, unit champions. So normally you would only have one or the other in terms of design. But yeah, ultimately you are building, if you want 4 different models, you're building all 4 of them. And you'll notice I've been ticking them off as I've been doing each variant. Once I ticked one off, I know that the next model, I don't want to accidentally rebuild that one a second time, because ultimately I want, say, the other one. So at the top, actually, this should be ticked because I've built all of Gluttons now. So yeah, that is somewhat confusing when it comes to the layout, and there are more confusing bits. And there are times where you'll notice it says 9, part A, then BC. Then for the variant, you're doing 9 and you're doing part A again, because that is the similar body parts. But then you're going on to D and E. So for example, let's look here. So 9A, you're building the body. And then you're carrying on with variant B for the champion, and you're going all the way down to C, which creates you your champion. However, if you wanted the optional variant, which isn't a champion, you're doing 9A, so you're doing this part at the top, but then you're actually flipping over and then you're carrying on D and D, which completes this version. And there were times when I was wanting to, say, build option 10A with DE, and actually I was carrying on with option 10A, and then just by default I went to B and C. So if we look at the option 10, this is your universal, you're building 2 of them regardless. And then one option, so it's sort of saying up to 1, but technically I think you can build them twice if you really wanted to. B and C gives you 1 build, D and E gives you the other build, but it's very easy to just keep following the instructions and not noticing where the variant starts. So that's something to be very mindful of when you are doing your builds. And similarly, you get similar issues with the next lot that you can build for parts 11 and 12. So that is 4 more models that you can assemble. So this is another confusing one where you're given for number 13 to build 2 different variants, one with a hammer, one with a sword and knuckle duster. However, the kit actually doesn't start at this point. It starts in the step above, which is 13A. You are assembling 2 bodies. Once you've got those bodies, you are then picking your variants and going down that route. It is very odd that they've not been consistent here in the same way as all the others, where this 13A should be underneath and the instructions should tell you to do part A, B, C, or A, D, E, exactly like every other assembly sheet in here. So again, A, the generic piece between the 2 variants, and then B, C, or D, E. And the fact is that they're giving you the variant after they've told you to build it here. It's just not consistent. It's very confusing. And as you can see here, the B and sort of effectively D options, the 2 variants, are there on that other sheet. Again, I've actually noticed that the background is ever so slightly color-coded, not easily to pick up on, but you can see a slight pink and a slight green option for those variants. So I thought I would bring back in some of the sprues. This one is from the Gluttons, so I built the Gluttons completely, and these are the leftover pieces. So you do get a lot of spares with the Gluttons, and you do get a lot of sort of variant options that you can build in terms of sort of heads, as well as weapon options as well. So that's one of the sprues. I mean, I have tons of these sprues left over, but I thought I would just show you them for reference. So the helmets on these ones are 1 piece, whereas the iron guts are 2 pieces. And what's interesting is I did notice that there are some interchangeability between heads that aren't covered in the instructions, because I was just sort of randomly trying things out. And I did notice that some of them fit other kits that weren't sort of prescribed to fit on them. And I don't know if that's just a bit of a rarity, but they're not particularly called out. And when it comes to kit bashing, because everything is so designed uniquely for individual builds, it feels like it's very difficult to go off-piste and start kit bashing and trying to use pieces, because ultimately I don't want to start using a different head or like a different hammer or weapon option that I then might realize I kind of need that in one of the other kits later on, because it might be that there isn't a variant for that build and that's the only way of building it. So yeah, I would love it if there was a bit more of a sort of pick and mix style where you can choose more head options or more weapon options. I think overall though they've done it quite well, but they just don't maybe do as great a job of calling out some more of that interchangeability if possible. I mean, maybe they're not super interchangeable. Things like the backpack pieces are very, like the satchels are very sculpted on, and I think they're pretty unique for that body that they're on. So you would need to do a bit of work when it comes to trying to fit them on pieces where they don't belong. So the other thing I wanted to call out was actually the great build quality of the miniatures and how they go about hiding the seam lines. Now, I'm really a bit anal retentive when it comes to hiding seam lines and cleaning them up and stuff like that. So I try and minimize them as much as possible. But for example, you had some seam lines probably on the head joint, which then gets covered by the helmet. I will make a sort of definition here. A seam line is when two parts fit together and there's a gap going down them, versus a mold line, which is normally a visible edge on a piece, which needs to be trimmed up. So, for example, along the elbow along here, there'd normally be a visible mold line where the two halves of the mold, when they're creating the plastic, a little bit like seeps out. So that bit just needs trimming off with a knife, whereas a seam line, which you can sort of see was along here originally, that needs cleaning up. Likewise, you can see there was one on this side. So they do quite a good job of hiding them in things like the creases and also in the folds of the muscle. And likewise, along the top, all the way along here, they've hidden it there as well. So they've done a good job of hiding them in sort of plain sight where possible, but it's still slightly noticeable. The way I went about it is I used my knife and scored inside, scraping it along. So a bit of plastic would cover that hole. I then use some Tamiya extra thin cement and just dab that along the edge, and it sort of melts the plastic. And then once I had set, I had sort of used a very, very fine piece of sandpaper and just gone up and down to try and buff out any of the scratches or marks that were left. And I made sure I used water with that sandpaper. And then basically I repeated that process normally 2 or 3 times each time to basically just make sure that gap was filled in and the plastic was as smooth as possible. And then also the sandpaper helps get rid of some of the shine that you get from using that Tamiya extra thin cement. So yeah, overall, the finished result of these models is phenomenal. I love the 3-dimensional element to the gut plate. I like how that sticks out and how, it's just really, it works so well. And that pretty much just snaps in place and then you can just glue it in, but it fits really well and seamlessly. And overall, there's not too many parts for this model. I think you get a couple of feet pieces, your sort of front and back, torso and legs, piece for the arm, piece for the hand, the sword, the fist, the sort of satchel at the back, the head, and then the helmet. So the gluttons don't have a huge number of pieces in terms of fitting them together. And then lastly, we've got the Maulbeast Raiders, which could also be built as the Maulbeast Cavalry. And the thing to note here is these aren't just variant designs, these are different units that we can now build, which is very important because this impacts how these models play on the tabletop because they're completely different units. I wanted to build mine as the Maulbeast Cavalry because I like their aesthetic. They're a bit more punchy. That's sort of what I want out of the unit. So yeah, you follow the instructions in terms of how to do them. 14 and 16 or 17 and 19 are your different instructions. So for example, I do not want this piece at all for the Maulbeast Raiders. I will flip past all of the Maulbeast Raiders to get to the Maulbeast Cavalry. And you will start here, you will assemble the heads, the bodies of the beasts, and then you get onto some sort of variant choices and cosmetic choices, and then you get to building your 2 options. One of them I think is a champion and one technically isn't, but it's very minor in terms of how the different pieces look. And then you get your second Maulbeast, and then ultimately you end up with 2 of them. So the only other thing I really wanted to point out on the Maulbeast Cavalry, again, like really phenomenal kit in terms of how they put them together. And I was slightly cautious about building it all as one piece because of painting. So I did make mine easily able to disassemble for sub-assemblies, at least from the rider to the beast itself. These armor plates, for example, I could have left off and sub-assembled, and likewise with these horns, because these would give me better access to the sort of skin being draped down, this kind of reptilian cloak hide covering the beast. So yes, if I didn't have the horns on, it would give me greater access to that, but I kind of wanted to keep that on because it would give me some great sort of shading effects if I'm doing some zenithal highlighting from an airbrush. And then likewise when it comes to these armor pieces, which is only for the champion on the cavalry, the armor pieces actually sort of help me not paint up some of the skin. And again, if I'm using an airbrush, I'll get some nice shadow effects, hopefully, from that piece covering part of the skin. And ultimately, that will just be painted metal. So I think it would be quite straightforward. Now, this is where the kit is both good and bad. So I spent absolutely ages cleaning up these seam lines around the top of the necks because they were the most visible. You can also see some still on the seats, but I kind of realized that on the seat, the guy is going to be covering it up, so I didn't need to worry about that. But it was only much later on that I realized that the neck piece is all covered by part of the reins. So I didn't need to spend absolutely ages cleaning up those seam lines, only to have it being covered up later. And that was the same thing for a lot of the models when it came to the gluttons of Iron Guts. There would be elements which would then be covered up by other bits, whether it's a helmet on the neckline, or maybe there's some like shoulder guard detail, or the gut plate would cover up a lot of seam lines. So I think you need to look at the kit and sort of look a few steps ahead to see what's going to be coming next, so you don't spend lots of time cleaning up bits which ultimately won't be visible whatsoever. So I thought that would be worth noting. And then lastly, if you were interested to make this possible to be sub-assembled, so you can see here underneath the rider on the seat, there were these two little nodules. I've just trimmed them off. And then underneath the rider, where there's these two little notches, I just trimmed that off ever so slightly, which meant he kind of sort of snaps in place, but there's enough flex in the plastic that I can also just pop him off. If I had left those notches on, he would be stuck in there. It would like lock him in place permanently. Yeah, hopefully it means I can paint up the beast pretty much separately and the rider separately. And then at the end, I can glue those together, and you've got a nice sort of defined point here. I could just glue that down where the metal piece of the reins meets the neck. And yeah, everything else, you could sort of glue bits down here to secure him, but I think just a bit of glue on the bum will keep him down. And to be honest, the way he snap fits in doesn't really need gluing anyway. So what I think I would likely do is prime the model all assembled like this, then snap him off, prime the bits that I can't quite reach, but make sure I leave some of the contact points unprimed to make gluing much easier. And yeah, that's it for my whistle-stop tour of Games Workshop sprues. It's worth noting that things like the mold lines are quite easy to clean up. There wasn't too many on them, but they still do need doing slightly. Having Tamiya extra thin cement, having a sharp knife is really helpful for just cleaning up your mold lines and filling in your seam lines, for example. Yeah, it was relatively easy just using a knife to sort of scrape over them on these kits. Sometimes I'll use what's called sprue goo, which is a combination of plastic sprues, like leftover bits. You just snip off like the corner bits that you don't need, put that in a pot of the Tamiya extra thin cement, and it melts it along into a gunk. And that can also be really useful for filling in gaps. You could use super glue and, kind of quick set accelerator and then sort of file that back as well. There's a bunch of different ways of filling in gaps, but for these kits, they've done a really phenomenal job. There's a lot of multi-part choice, especially when it comes to the gluttons, less so with the Iron Guts. You get two different unit options when it comes to the cavalry and sort of two visually distinct ways of building the tyrant as well. So they've done a really phenomenal job with how it builds, how it assembles. Has been a joy for the most part. Some of it's been a bit time consuming, but yeah, the instructions are just a little bit complicated, and sometimes it feels like the layout isn't as optimized as it could be. Sometimes the symbols aren't quite as clear as they should be. So if you're new to building Games Workshop stuff, that might be a bit of a learning curve. And ultimately, the choice and the amount of options is a bit overwhelming in a way. You get lots of different things that you can do, and you have a preset way of doing it is build option 1 or build option 2. And there's a few little tweaks here and there for some cosmetic changes, but it's not like the days of old, or it's not like in the previous video where I talked about Victoria miniatures for their guardsman miniatures. All the legs are like one piece. All the torsos are one piece, all the arms are one piece or two pieces, and they are all interchangeable with each other. And you used to get that with kind of classic guardsmen and classic regiments, and, you know, classic tactical marines used to have that sort of style of build. And those days are sort of, I feel, long gone for Games Workshop. But that makes sort of kit bashing much easier, I would say, than the modern kits of Games Workshop. The monopose style of Games Workshop is you get much more interesting and dynamic poses, but it's very difficult to kit bash those miniatures. You almost need to assemble them and then go, okay, what am I going to cut up and repose, or what can I then swap out? What have I got left? And one of the reasons why I've deliberately left the Tyrant to last is because I do want to kit bash him. So one, I wanted some experience building up the rest of the Gluttons and the Iron Guts to work out how they assemble first, so I feel a bit more confident going in and modifying the Tyrant. But I also wanted to see what I had left over. So maybe I don't want to use the Tyrant's head. Maybe I want to use a different one. Maybe I want to use a different weapon. So ultimately I wanted to see, you know, what was left over on these sprues that I could then use for converting up the Tyrant model. That's it for this segment. Thank you for watching, and we can now get on with the rest of the show. Transitional noise. In this part of the episode, we're talking all about Warhammer Necromunda Skirmish, as it's now called. But I'm also joined by a special guest, Richie. How's it going?
Hello. Happy to be here. Very excited for talking about Necromunda stuff, because we're doing a new campaign at some point.
Finally got you back on. But yeah, as you alluded to, we're now doing, I think, your third Necromunda campaign. Is that right?
Yes, it will be my third.
Yeah, and it'll be my second, because we did one last year, but that one sort of ground to a halt halfway through, just before the hive collapsed as it descended into chaos, and we didn't get to finish it off. So it'd be good to sort of reboot it under the new format, basically.
Which is a shame, because I had Bob the Ogrin, who I was having a lot of fun with.
Yeah, same. And I think that's the sort of fun bit about Necromunda, is you do get quite attached to your characters and your gang. So it's a bit of a shame to sort of reset it or redo them. I think for me, I'm just going to keep with the same gang. And yeah, lore-wise, they're going to be the same gang, but I'm just going to retell their stats, I think. So they're classed as a new gang, but having survived the collapse of whatever hive they were in before, they're going to now be setting up shop in a new hive.
Well, I might do is it talent? Whatever the lesser of the RBTs is. I was having that chat with our friend Spike about, because the RBTs are like, they are not really there in Necromunda. They're too important.
Yes.
The
enforcers, Palatine enforcers are the sort of regular cops.
Yeah, so they are there, and I might do them this time. What I'm thinking, mostly so that I don't just snowball like I had in the previous campaign.
Yes, because you did quite well in the other campaigns, to be fair, with your Escher. Yeah, I've got some. Yeah, I think everyone was talking about Palatine enforcers when they did the last set of upgrades for them, like the judges and stuff like that, because they all look very good. I've got some Palatine enforcer kits that I was using for kit bashes for other things, so I was always tempted to do them, and Goliaths are the other ones I'd like to do. But I think because we're starting kind of next month, I'm going to say, there's not much time to get a new gang built and painted. So for me, I'll just finish off painting the gang that I started with.
Well, I want to wait until we get all the new books, because at least so we can then deep dive in all the rules and how the game actually works before I pick my gang, is what I'm saying anyway.
Yeah,
I might end up just doing Escher again, because I've got Escher and I've pre-ordered the new box, so I'll have the new Escher minis anyway.
Oh, that is true. Yeah, lots of choice. Well, with that said, a perfect segue to carry on. So yeah, we're going to look at some of the rules, but not really, but what they're supplying with us. We're going to look at the new journals, and we're going to look at some of the new gang minis as well. But I thought it'd be worth taking a look at what they're giving us in the Gangs of the Underhive and Gangs of the Outlands, which are the two sort of supplementary books that are currently on pre-order, because these give you all the rules for the current existing gangs. The Underhive gangs are sort of the generic ones, like Kaldor, Talak, Escher, Goliath, the classic ones, but it also includes Corpse Grinder Cult, the Palatine Enforcers, which are kind of newish, and then the Venator gangs, which are like the elite ones, which are sort of made up. There's no real models for them. You can kind of I think it's done in a way where you can just use them to represent almost anything. And then Gangs of the Outlands is the one I need to pick up. So that covers things like Outcasts, Free Ogrins, which I don't really remember being in the original, Gene Stealer Cults, Chaos Helots is what specifically I want it for, Mouse Strain, which is like the new type of Gene Stealers, and Spire Hunters, Squat Prospectors, Ash Waste Nomad. So all the sort of mostly outdoor stuff or things that were never in publications before. So Gene Stealer Cults and Chaos Helots, well, very originally were White Dwarf, then they came out in supplementary books down the line. So yeah, it's interesting they give you 2 different books, and I kind of understand why. The downside is if you have, maybe you collect 2 gangs and they're across those 2 books, it's like, I think they're like £35 each. So it's a bit of an expense if you need to buy both. And then in each book, you also get additional rules. So there's the alliances. They talk about like hired guns, hive scum, brutes and hangers-on, and dramatis persona, which are kind of like named characters. And it's slightly different between the Underhive and the Outlands. I think the hangers-on are pretty similar, but noting it feels like they're only giving you the brutes that actually had model and that they don't give you anything else. And same for dramatis persona. They're only giving you things and hired guns that they produced models for. And then towards the bottom, they do say, here's all the stuff that you can download for free or will be able to download for free, which are basically things that never got models but did have rules in the previous edition. Noting that they give you dramatis persona, which are the named characters, the alliances and delegations, and also the hangers-on, which is like people that you can bolt onto your gang. Interesting that the Cadaver Merchant is in there because that actually does have a model.
I was going to say that it appears that they have at some point made a decision for what is going to go into the Gangs of the Underhive and Gangs of the Outlands books in terms of those hangers-on, etc. They may be the most common ones or the most popular ones, but then within the PDF download they're going to release, that's got literally everything off, and there's lots of stuff there that has minis. Yeah, the model that I bought for the last campaign that we never, that then sadly it stopped, so we didn't get to do it, was I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this. Scrutinator Primus Servalan and KB88, which was like a Palatine gun for hire who had her own Cyber Mastiff. That's a model.
That was quite a new model as well, actually.
Relatively new, and that's in the download. So is Bigby Crumb, who is the rattling. He's in there. But then there's stuff that definitely didn't have models. I want to say, like, I'm not going to pick one because I know Vandoff the Fallen. I'm pretty sure that's the
Blood Space Marine guy. Yeah,
I think Spike got that model. So it feels that there is some the alliances and delegations. I'm pretty sure those will never had minis.
I think they're just sort of factions that were within the rules. Because you can often ally yourself with, depending on which campaign system you're doing. So yeah, they never needed models, although I think there are some models that represent certain guilds, for example. But I don't think they were any of these that I can think of. But what's odd is they don't give you any of the extra brutes. And obviously I've been looking at this with the Chaos Helots in mind, and Chaos Helots had access to lots of the kind of chaos sort of aligned brutes. So you had the Chaos Ogrin. I think there was also like a Psyker version of the Ogrin as well. There was a Sump Beast, which was like a model that you could kind of customize in a variety of ways to replicate different kinds of monsters. But also you had the Warp Horror, which was like this, thing from the Warp that you could, again, use to represent anything. And they also had a Spawn model, but that was part of the list. So it'd be interesting to see if that makes the cut in terms of one of the, if that's part of the actual cult itself. And that doesn't seem to be anywhere. So selfishly, I've been looking at it from my own gang and the models I've been creating and the brutes I wanted to add to that gang. And it feels like there's just not going to be rules for the Chaos Spawn, like the Warp Horror, I mean.
There might be. There might be at the bottom of the article. So we can clarify ourselves that we've been incorrect with this, that every model that's getting a download in the PDF, so every unit, character, what have you, that's getting a PDF rules in the PDF has a model.
Yes,
they all have models. But things that you're saying, the things that don't have models, like the Sump Beast, like the Chaos Ogrin, they might be getting rules. So far, everything that ever had a model
Yeah.
is getting rules in some capacity.
Yeah. So I guess it's that classic case where the specialist games team quite often give you a bunch of rules to kind of encourage you to convert stuff up. And now they're being slightly stingy, maybe, with not supplying rules for them, which I sort of understand because they probably want scope to release a new model for those things down the line and then probably update the rules for it at the same time, which, they might do with any of these ones that aren't in the publications, the free PDF ones. So I sort of get why. If it sort of reminds me of like Blood Bowl, both the game and the tabletop game, like the computer game and tabletop game. So when you go from like the second edition PC game to the third edition one, you start off with going from second edition where it was all singing, all dancing, had every single team, every single star player that you could possibly want, loads more beyond the kind of core rules. And then third edition comes around and you're back to like the standard 6 teams and nothing else. And then you've got to wait until they do all the DLC to finally get back to the place where you began with in second edition. It feels a bit like this, where it's like, cool, we're jumping into a new edition and we're just losing stuff, which to be fair happens in 40k just as much as it does in things like Blood Bowl. So yeah, it's a little bit annoying if I've not got access to a brute, for example, out the gate. Which makes me a little bit worried about running my Chaos Helots. But then maybe that surprises me.
Did you build that Chaos Helot?
Not the Chaos Ogren, or I ended up going for the Warp Spawn, basically. So I did my kind of spider, the Thing-inspired sort of spider conversion, basically. So I got that built, ready to paint, in preparation for the second half of the campaign that never came. And because of that, I never got around to painting it. So I was hoping that this would be a perfect excuse to get that painted and finished off. I've still got 2 hangers on to paint up or finish painting because I sort of half painted them. So I've got other things that I think would still be useful, because one of them was the Corpse Merchant and the other one was, I think, the Agitator, which I guess is going to be, it's not, is this in, no, it's not, oh yeah, Agitator, so it is in there. So it will come with some rules. So yeah,
it might be in there because the Chaos, the Helots, right? That's the one you're looking at.
Yeah,
they've got 3 pages of data sheets, which feels like more than in the current version where you only had like 1 page.
Yeah, possibly. Well, so I think they had probably, because the 1 page was dedicated to the familiars. The Spawn was sort of thrown in somewhere as well, and then you've got the 2 sort of champion. You got like your champion, you've got your psychic witch, and then you've got your leader. So yeah, but it doesn't feel like they would put brutes within the actual core.
They might
roster.
On the basis. The only reason I think I'm saying that they
gang
might
specific, maybe.
Yes, if it's like only one gang, because the ones that are listed in the books are things like Ammo Jacks, Stone Runners, Rogue Docs, Giant Rats, Ripper Jacks, the Servitor Ogrin, the Ambot. Any
which
gang
is
can
kind of
take
generic,
these.
yeah.
So it could be that if there are specific ones, they're in there.
Yeah, because every gang has like a kind of brute that's often specific to just that one gang. So you are right. Maybe they'll be in the gang list, which will be interesting. Yeah, I hope so. Potentially the Warp Horror or something else could also be used by another gang, perhaps like the Corpse Grinder Cult, but maybe not many others. So yeah, maybe they've done it like that.
Yeah, because Escher and Raxus are 2 unique types of pets. So the question, something that'll be interesting to see is, are those pets included in the Gangs of the Underhive with the House Escher summary, or are they in the journal, the Underhive journal that's coming out, or are they in both, or neither? That's a big, that's like a topic I would guess of. Do you need to buy all the books, or if you want to pick a gang, do you need to buy your Gangs of the Underhive book, big book, and the journal when it comes out, or could you get away with just one of them? We currently don't know.
I think you have to get both. But let's move on to the next page so we can discuss that shortly, basically. Before we get on with the journals, let's have a quick look at the new artwork and sort of the new art style. Because some of it, like this one, I'm really not a huge fan of. And I noticed a few other people online sort of echo similar grievances where it just doesn't look that great. And I can't necessarily put my finger on why I don't like it. I think to some extent there's a very I guess, a wispy element to it in terms of there's lots of like lines, sort of, in terms of how it's been drawn. It obviously is digital art, but also I think the proportions are slightly off and the lighting is maybe slightly off with this artist style, and it just doesn't look as finessed as some of the other artwork. I mean, what are your thoughts on this piece and this person's art style?
I think it's fine. The thing I don't like about this piece and a lot of the other pieces is that they look like they've been made digitally on a series of layers, so they can be easily transposed into books or articles or web or into other sources. Because there's nothing in the background, and I think that's intentional because they can just lift this off and put it into a book.
Yes, because I think
that's why it looks weird,
and some of the others, are then collaged together in the journal covers. I think we can double check that in a second.
Because if you scroll up to the main art, to the
along here, oh yeah, that looks way better. So that's further down. So again, this is the same artist, and I don't want to. Any artist.
I'm the one to slow down. Yeah.
But yeah, similar, you can see all these sort of faint little lines and that art style. I don't know if it's the same artist, but this art style is also in the Ogor Mawtribes book, but just sort of looks better. But it's got it's a very sort of distinct style that's different from what I'm used to seeing for the Necromunda artwork. Then there's the sort of, I think this is a much older piece, but just looks fantastic and is much more evocative and has sort of some emotional weight behind it, I would say, in terms of the lighting and feeling. And likewise this piece as well. This is like phenomenal, and there's, as you say, there's a background, there's a setting, you see them in the gang, in the Underhive, they're fighting. This sort of summarizes what Necromunda's all about, and it just looks very polished, like it all looks very detailed and finished, but also there's a lot of emotion and expression, whereas the portrait pieces are just sort of flat and expressionless. They're just like sort of quite plain portraits, for want of a better word. Likewise with this guy, like the sort of expressionless in terms of the face. Parts of it has got this, red light coming in, lighting up bits of the armor and the weapon, but then other bits like the belt seem like they're being lit in a completely different way, like from a different lighting source. This glow is only affecting part of the body and not all of it. So yeah, they just don't quite hit home to me in the same way as, something like this.
I think it's like the most of the portraits are all, to me at least, they feel like concept art or something. They're not designed. They don't feel like they exist in a space. It's just because they're all basically the same. Give the same rough pose. They're all the same slight angle to the camera. Whether they're looking to the left or the right, this reminds me of those things when you're like a kid and you get like the cutout of a person, and then you can put different outfits on them. Right, that's what they kind of feel like, because they're all kind of very static in the same sort of positioning, so that it feels like they've been built to specifications for a wider use rather than like, here's a cool piece of artwork. So I think that's for me why they don't necessarily, why some of them don't look that great. All the ones where pieces of artwork where it's like in a space, or it's like a close up. Like there's one, I believe it's of Cal Jericho.
Oh yeah,
that one there. That looks cool because it's
for sure.
So I don't know who. The next one is also is not too much going on there, but it has like some kind of presence. But again, it feels a little bit it's better than some of than the portraits. The standard portraits they will probably look fine on the covers of the books, what have you. But just when they just stand like this, they kind of look like this is not how they're supposed to be seen.
Yeah, true. So but even with this one, like there's a pose to it, like they're sort of walking forwards, and there's like background detail, and it feels much more polished. Like I can't see the lines of the sort of the digital pen, for example, on this piece, whereas you can very much see them on these pieces. You can sort of see the wispy lines of the drawing, and then in the background. So a very like sort of highly polished concept art rather than a sort of box art cover piece of artwork. And it's probably not intended to be that either. If
you wanted to see what I think is like a good comparison of how these pieces of art are intended to be used, here for example we have one of the Eschers. I think if you scroll down or up, you see the other Escher. If you scroll up and you'll see the other Escher. there. So there, if you jump forward a page to just briefly to the Escher article, you'll see
well, we can
you'll
go
see,
to that anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, so we go to that, and you scroll down to just briefly past the minis and look at the cover of the book. That's how those images are supposed to be seen.
Yeah, and they do
and
work a lot better there, actually, I would say. It's interesting, actually, that this has a sort of very red sort of colour palette to it, and then the other one has, again, sort of red-purple sort of scheme. But if we look at this one, now maybe it's just been cropped off so you can't see it, but obviously it's blending in more with the green. So I don't know if they've actually changed the artwork slightly, or maybe it's just, I don't know. But it definitely feels like it works better. Yeah.
Yeah, as something, some of that artwork they released in there. Here's the artwork of the new edition. We're seeing it outside of it's artwork that's been created to be used in certain ways, like on the covers of these books where it looks cooler. That one just in isolation, and it just looks kind of, this isn't so good. Which I think is a shame, really, because the art is very good, but it's not designed to be seen on its
standalone. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And when I saw it, I was almost a bit disappointed and a bit worried, and being like, "Oh, is this the new art style for everything in Necromunda?" Because I remember when they did that with the, I'm trying to think which version of Blood Bowl it was. Not the very last version, but I think the time before, where they sort of really lent into that kind of cartoony art style, and they lost some of the more realistic looking art style. And it's like, oh, okay, that's what they're now doing for everything. Whereas, as you say, here, it makes me worry less because this looks a lot better. But yeah, so this is the journal for Escher called House of Blades, which is the same name as the House of book that Escher came with. So before you'd buy House of Blades, and that was effectively their codex for the gang. And then they've done House of Chains, which we'll look at in a minute, for Goliath as well. So this is using the new journal format for Necromunda, which is similar to how they've done the journals for Horus Heresy and the Old World. Technically, even Blood Bowl had magazines, but they were called Spike Magazine, which is like their sort of in-world Blood Bowl magazine, which effectively is a journal as well. And I think that's where that idea initially originated, like these softback books, very sort of light on content, but like still a decent amount, but also really cheap. So I think they're on average like £15. So they're pretty good value for money, I would say, in terms of what you get out of it. It is obviously sort of book creep.
You don't know if they're charging 50 quid for it yet?
I mean, if you look at all the other journals, they're normally 15, I think. You can fact check me. But who knows how, so I would assume they would be similar price, but you don't know for sure. You are right, because it depends on how much content that you're going to get out of it. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly how these marry up. And I think a lot of people initially thought, okay, cool, they're resetting all the books. So yeah, we're just getting your main book and you're getting your gang book, whether that's the Outlands or the Unhive. And that's all you need to play the game, which is technically true. And I think maybe people were expecting the journals to be more campaign books and like different campaign styles. And that way it would introduce more characters and, brutes and hangers on and things like that. But instead they're giving you these House of style books for gangs already. So yes, if you've got Goliath or you've got Escher, it feels like, oh, I've already got to buy an additional book on top of it before the game's even out, which I can understand why people would be a bit disappointed by. But it feels like they're doing it in a way where they're giving you additional content that maybe means you just need this book and not the other book. It's a bit hard to tell, because it feels like so for example, the models that they're previewing here, like potentially their own gang, or like the models that come in the new core book are their own separate gang, aren't they? Whereas these ones here, I think that they're previewing are like champions, if I recall correctly. So yeah, you give Escher matriarchs and Firecats added to the collection, along with a selection of gang champions to your roster, along with esoteric weapons, plus a pair of vicious Firecats to give your leaders some extra protection. The gang queen has Power Axe and gets 5 gang matriarchs, one of whom wears skin of a Firecat. So yeah, this is the first one, which I guess
I'm not a fan of that, wearing the skin of the Firecat one. That feels weird. It feels weird to me that you have them as if you've got the pets and also wear one. Yeah, that feels weird to me.
It's like having a pet fox, but then wearing fox fur, I guess. Yeah, it's a bit odd. It's quite a cool mini. She's got like sort of a bolt rifle. So it's like a bolt gun, but turned into a rifle, or got a rifle stock attached to the bolt gun, which is quite unique. I quite like the creepiness of the cat. It's like those, bald cats that you see, but looking yet even more evil on it.
I don't know. I think it's cool that. Well, I already have some of the old, because they used to. What's interesting to me is that what they're doing with this new box is they're combining a bunch of different separate bits that they used to get. Because if you wanted to technically get an Escher matriarch before, they would only sell them like in individual resin options, or maybe plastic. I can't remember, but they were like individuals. Like you couldn't really like get them and customize them, sure, outside of just using the existing minis you had. But there's now going to be you want the one with the hammer? There's a very specific mini which has the hammer, or you want one which has got a rifle? There's a very specific one on the rifle. I think it's cool. They have now added in a kit which has got various options for how to create these higher leveled up gangers who you can either start as matriarchs, or you'll have with matriarchs being like the champions of the gang. You either start low and then you can level up, or you just start at the higher rank. I think it's cool that you've got these. Plus, they've also put the fear cats in there, which you used to have to buy as a separate kit. Completely. So they give you so now that they're giving you here is all you need for your higher ranked geared gang leaders and gang champions and the fear cats that they'll take with them. I think this is a really cool thing they're doing with both Escher, and I know because I did Escher before, I see the real value of this. And it looks like every gang is going to get something like this with whatever their pet would be, or like machinery that they'll get, plus all their like champions and champions gear. This is a really cool addition to the range.
I feel like awesome. The Squat Prospectors had something similar to this already, although I can't remember if it was in resin or plastic, where it was like you got a champion plus a couple of little bots. So yeah, it might be that they'd done that with Squat Prospectors already. How do you feel like this is a bolt-on to the big box? Because obviously you can buy the Escher gang plus the expansion with the sort of extra, like the Juve styles and specialist weapons, and then the upgrade kit. And that was like this big all-encompassing box of here's everything with the exception of the brand new stuff. And now they've gone, but now here's an extra lot of upgrades. Or do you feel like this is more replacing the resin stuff that they were doing rather than the plastic?
I thought this is replacing the resin stuff they did before, rather than, because all of this stuff, and I can't remember if there wasn't it? Or if they were special plastic kits. It might be special plastic kits, but it feels like this is reducing the amount of models that they have that you'd have to individually buy. Because you'd used to have to buy, if you wanted to get some Escher matriarchs, you'd have to buy one. You could buy them like one at a time. You have to buy the fear cat separately. Now you just get a box to go with you. I think if you bought the Escher gang box, which they're now selling, I think, which gives you the Escher gang and the Escher gang box and the Wild Runners box, which would give you some of the Wild Runners, some of the little pets whose names escapes me right now, plus a couple of Deathmaid. That big box gave you all the options you needed to have a Escher gang over time. You would fundamentally have more models than you'd need. Whichever of those big boxes you buy, you're going to end up with more than you needed, but you've got all the options for all the different types of gangers you'd want to have in that gang. The only thing those big boxes didn't have was stuff like champions, weapons kits, some of the more advanced pets. So I think that this kind of box, for if you are collecting Escher, I don't think this is a box you're buying right off the bat.
Right.
I think if you're starting out with Escher, you can buy. If you want to go nuts, get this as well, because then you can start having fear cats off the bat and more elaborate matriarchs off the back. But I think if you're going into a campaign, the standard box you get gives you your gang queen. It gives you a plethora of customizable elements to make the rest of your gang and level them up. At some point, those gangers are going to be leveling up to such a point where they are matriarchs themselves, or you want to add another matriarch, or you want to add the fear cats, and then this kind of box added into it will be really cool as something on top. because I remember when I played as Escher, the first thing I had was the standard gang box, which was half of what's in the current gang box they sell. And then I bought the other half as the campaign went on to give me more options. So I don't necessarily think you would need to buy this off the bat, because if you're starting an Escher gang and you've got a Fear Cat, I think you've made some very interesting choices with your credits, not knowing how gang creation works in this edition. But I think that's a big, because they are quite expensive, especially lots of the stuff the matriarchs have. That this is more of the exotic weaponry you'll get later in the campaign that as you're starting to flesh out your gang.
Yeah, so, that's true. I just thought I'd get the Escher Underhive crew box out, so yeah, you can see the standard gang plus some of the sort of specialist models and weapons, and then as you're saying, the pets.
Yeah, basically everything at the bottom of that screenshot is what you got in the standard box, and what you used to get in the standard Escher crew.
And then the top stuff was the more elite units, isn't it?
It was more. It's when they did over time with all the gangs that they would add in essentially at least two new classes, because each gang would have the ganger, and they would have the Juve, and they'd have their champion and the gang leader. Then with the new boxes, so in Escher, for the example, you can see they added the Wild Runners, which is a different type of Jews. You can see them with the bows and arrows and the whips, and they had the pets with them. Plus, they had the Death Maidens, who were there in the middle at the top, who were there they're like zombie lady killing machines that they could get. And I never got to have a Death Maiden in my gang because I wanted to do it the proper way of having a gang member die and be revived.
Is that how it happens?
That was it's not the only way it happens. You can just recruit them, but there was a strong narrative element to it that when you could have it, so if one of your gang members died and they were experienced enough, if you had a chemist, they could turn them into a Death Maiden, or you could roll a dice and turn them into a Death Maiden. There's a possibility it could happen. And I was always hoping that it could happen in one of those more interesting ways. It never did. But I do have the minis, I just never used them.
Oh, that's cool. It's a bit like my Chaos Spawn could only ever appear during a ritual gone wrong, basically. You could never just buy it off the bat. You had to turn one of your models into a Chaos Spawn, basically. But yeah, let's have a look at some of the other miniatures, like this sort of needle sniper rifle is a really cool mini. I love the sort of extreme pose of the leg being braced up against sort of a random bit of debris. And then you've got like a plasma rifle, I guess, for want of a better word. And
I'm just going to change weapons as a plasma gun.
Yeah, the plasma gun's very cool. And then we've also got, I guess these are more your matriarchs. This is the Fear Cat. I was saying Fear Cat skin. Yeah, that's a bit mad. Sort of really reminds me of the, what are they called? The gang that always lived outside that was more nomadic and sort of the Native American inspired ones.
I want to say Rat, something like that.
Yeah, same. I can't remember, but they had similar vibes. Was it just Ratskin?
I think Ratskin Renegades was what it was. Yeah, I feel like Ratskin Renegades is what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, I googled it. It was the Ratskin Renegades, yeah.
Nice, yeah. And then the one on the left's got this high kind of gorget style neck piece and a little hammer as well. And then lastly,
that's a big hammer, Phil. That's not a little hammer.
Well, little for 40k terms, but big for Necromunda terms. I guess, the Goliaths all have bigger hammers as well, but...
big for the Eschers.
Yeah.
And one thing I will shout out here is the bow. As far as I can tell from memory, that's a cooler looking bow than the Escher Wild Hunters would get, or the Wild Runners would have, because it looks slightly bigger, and it looks like it's got a scope on it.
There's a close-up of the bow. No, I don't think there is. Which is a bit of a shame.
Wait.
No, because it's not on any of the miniatures, but you can... Yeah, it's hard to tell, but it feels like that's a single bow, whereas the new one's sort of more like got a double bow to it. And yeah,
this is a bigger bow. It's got a scope on it. That looks cool, because the bows were really cool, but they reached a point where they were a bit meh, because their range was limited and the damage output they could do wasn't that great. So they were only good to have on the Wild Runner Juves.
Yeah, interesting. There's no string on it though. No, Warhammer does that sometimes, where they don't string their bows, but then sometimes they do. Like the crossbows on the Nighthaunt Craven Flame Guard have, they've sculpted on the bow. Maybe that's easier on a crossbow than a bow and arrow. But yeah,
it would probably break if they did that. But there's plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, it's cool, and the Fear Cat looks very cool with its striped skin.
They look so different though, the Fear Cats. I don't know if I like the new look or not. because the older ones were more like on the ground, ready to pounce, whereas these new and as such they were on ridiculously large bases. Whereas
Right.
these
Yeah.
new ones are much taller.
Yeah. I guess
if
they
you
wanted to make them a bit bigger.
look at the older ones, which they probably don't.
Let's see if I can find it on the Games Workshop website.
They might not be. You might just need to Google it. They're much taller, so I think they are. I think they're much. These ones will be much better to play with on the table because of their size. But they do. Yeah, they are a bit different to the original ones.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I think the new ones look a lot better. These sort of almost. Yeah, they've got very distinct. Yeah, they're definitely more chunky around the torso, but much smaller legs, and definitely
because these ones look more like
head style.
cats, whereas the new ones look almost like not that there's anything wrong with it, but they almost look like greyhounds, and they're quite tall and lanky.
Yeah, or like hyena type.
Yeah,
creatures. Yeah, you're right. These look more like your pet cat at home gone wild, whereas this looks more like a wild animal. Yeah, a lot bigger as a creature, less of a pet, that's for sure. But yeah, they're cool minis overall, I would say. Definitely. I think I prefer the new cat models for sure. I like the sort of face detail and the sort of more pointier ears. I think they look very cool. Whereas here, yeah, like the sort of the teeth and mouth just looks a bit oversized. Whereas this, I think, has better proportions than the new one. And then, yeah, some of the sculpts are really good. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the skull on this bolt rifle, but other than that, it's a cool mini. And I think some of the others, like the needle rifle one, looks very cool as well. The plasma gunner, that's also really cool. So yeah, I think they've done a good job with these sculpts. I think they're very cool looking. Have you got a particular favorite?
That weapons in Necromunda still feel inspired by old school Warhammer 40k, in that they look, and we'll see this more on the Goliath ones because they have the flamers, but the weapons are very visually distinct in ways, whereas in 40k now, weapons look all very similar, or they're trying to be almost real, like modern 21st century. Whereas in Necromunda, they're still making the guns look very clearly like this is in Necromunda. There is a very distinct shape to this, so you can see what gun that is at a distance. Because the needle rifle for me is always a classic example of that, because it doesn't make any sense why it looks that way, but it does. But it looks that way, so you know it's a needle rifle.
Yeah, I feel like Necromunda harkens back to older 40k, like sort of 2nd edition, 3rd edition, such as like the nozzle style on the plasma and the needle rifles. And I think Horus Heresy has also adopted that. Like they've taken that old sort of older editions of 40k and used that as the genesis of, this is the history of 40k because it existed in 30k. So in a way, it sort of does marry up, and it sort of implies that this is much more older tech than what, say, the Space Marines of Astra Militarum are currently using, which is sort of slightly more modernized. I think that's the case for sure.
Shout out to the wooden stocks on the weapons as well.
Yeah, it's not
the same on all of them. It makes them look really cool, especially on the rifles. Obviously, I'm assuming you can paint them however you want. I like the way they've done the paint job, because it makes them feel. It makes it feel like these are cool guns that existed in the Underhive that were made by maybe an artisan.
Yeah.
These aren't just regular production line las guns.
That's true.
Like special weapons that have been maybe passed down through different gangs.
Like sort of hunting rifles or something like that. Yeah. Although weirdly, the Traitor Guardsmen have a wooden stock as well, and it's textured to imply it's wood. But this actually works really well for these guys. I think looks good. Gives them a sort of antique aesthetic to them for sure. And then there's the Underhive journal itself, and they sort of give you a listing of what's in there. So you've got House Escher, which I think is all the lore stuff, talking about the history, the Aranthian succession, which was like one of the last campaigns. And I think Goliath has this as well. So this is, I guess, catching you up to date with where all the gangs are after the Aranthian succession. And some extra lore details. And then we got the gang lists and equipment. So there's 2 new types of gangs. There's the Wild Hunts, and there's the chemist cults. I assume one of them is in reference to the new models that you get, or maybe both are, and you can run them in different ways. And it sounds like these are not in addition to your gang. So historically, it seems like with Necromunda, you'd be like, here's your gang, and then here's some extra gang models that you could bolt on, and then here's some more extra gang models that you can bolt on, and here's a gang brutes that you can bolt on, and it just keeps getting added and added and added to the list, and you end up then with lots of bloat and rules potentially all over the place. Whereas this feels more like what they've been doing with, for example, the old world journals. It's like, here's a specific army list or gang list and a way of playing, which is completely different from your existing gang list. And it's not a bolt-on, it's instead of. So you'll be using a Wild Hunt gang or a Chemist Cults gang or a generic Escher gang list. And I assume that's where you don't necessarily need the old book. However, I sort of suspect there'd be elements of this book that you need if you want the old Escher gang. Because, yeah, you got the fighter profiles, which is just the profiles to go with a gang list. But then you've got the Escher Chem Alchemy, which includes your gang tactics, finesse skills, Escher territories and side jobs, and then equipment reference. And I think the most important thing is the territories and side jobs exist in the current core rules by the looks of it, but they're very generic. But here you get access to unique ones for your gang, so your games feel more unique and themed to your army. And even if you're a generic Escher gang, you would want these probably to just improve the quality of life of your game, even though you might not necessarily need that while you're playing the game. So to speak, it's not like it's extra characters or gang members, but it's just extra sort of effectively like side missions that you can do.
It's interesting to me because I think I pre-ordered both of the Outlands and the gangs before this was revealed, because what this looks like, what will be clearer next, possibly by the time you're hearing this, for dear listeners, is it's not clear what is in the Gangs of the Underhive and what isn't. Because it kind of felt originally it's like, oh, if you buy the Gangs of the Underhive book, you'll get the rules to your gang. This actually shows that doesn't appear to be the case, because fundamental things for Escher is, well, if it's got Escher finesse skills, that potentially suggests that you're not getting rules for the Death Maiden in the Gangs of the Underhive book. The Gangs of the because Death Maidens, at least currently, get finesse skills by default. It feels like if you're playing Escher, you have to get this. Especially if you've played Escher before, you're going to want to get Chem Alchemy, because that's the thing that I've always used, which annoys people, because that's how I get my special chemicals, which is a fundamental mechanic of playing as an Escher gang. So it feels like the Gangs of the Underhive books are very basic, very generic for if you want to be able to play a basic game with the new rules, with whatever models you happen to have. Whereas if you want to actually get some of the flavor of that gang, you're going to have to buy these journals, because that's where it's hidden.
Yeah, I mean, would you have rather yes, you could do the Gang Underhive book, which has all the gangs in it, but then in this House of the Blades journal, it also includes a generic Escher gang. So, for example, if you knew that you only collected Escher, you could be like, cool, I'm just going to buy this journal because this is effectively my codex. It has all the rules in one place. And I was told about this before the Gangs of the Underhive came out on pre-order, so I wouldn't have bought that and then felt bad about also buying this. Like, do you think that would have been a better kind of customer experience? And then you've just got one book rather than two?
One thing we don't know what's in each book at this point, so that is a factor. But I bought both the Gangs of the Underhive and the Gangs of the Outlands because I wanted to have as much information about everything Necromunda, so I could help run the campaign. Why I purchased the books is slightly different the way other people might have done. What would be interesting, what is kind of interesting, is what is in this book and what isn't compared to the two, because the way it used to be, I mean, the way Necromunda used to be was not ideal, I think is fair to say, because each codex, if you will, for a gang would include new generic hangers-on and brutes and other rules. So if you wanted to have all the rules to play Necromunda, you had to buy every codex effectively, codex equivalent for every gang, even ones you didn't want to play, because that might be where it had the rules for a specific hanger-on or brute you wanted.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Which is what I mean by it wasn't ideal. So I think this way of giving you one or two books, which will give you the broad strokes of the game, is probably a better way of doing it.
I suspect we'll probably end up back in that same situation though. So you've got your Underhive book, you've got your House of book, and then after a couple of campaign books, your named dramatis persona or your brute that will be in one of those campaign journal books will also be something you'll need. Maybe they won't do it like that. Maybe they keep it kind of concise, and maybe when they do different versions of Escher, they will do it in this kind of alternative gang lists. So if they, there might be a third type that will be a bit more standalone, so it doesn't feel like you need to buy it in quite the same way. But yeah, I feel like we'll end up in the same place with a bunch of books and rules spread all over the place.
We need to see what happens when new bespoke miniatures or like special characters,
come down the
hunters,
line,
how they're released, because I don't expect there to be an app for this, what should have everything. Though that would be great. I don't think I just don't see the Games Workshop having the resources for that.
It's too complicated, I feel like. And it's worth talking about because obviously none of the specialist games, so, whether that's Blood Bowl, Horus Heresy, The Old World, and Necromunda, none of them have had app support in the same way that 40k and Age of Sigmar have got them. There are sort of apps out there or websites, but it's all sort of, community driven. We used Munda Manager for the last campaign. I can't remember what we used before that, but we quickly switched over to Munda Manager and found that was really well done and sort of had all the content that we needed, but also, was much more up to date on some of the latest editions of the campaign books, whereas the previous version that we used didn't. I think they kind of stopped, but it was still good. So yeah, it would be. And they have said that they're going to work on incorporating this new, was it N26? I think it's being referred to as. So yeah, they're going to have that, which will be good. Because running a campaign pen and paper is a bit tricky, I think.
Either way, I'm very excited by what is in this book for as an Escher player. So I might end up playing Escher again just because it looks like there's new stuff. Because like a Wild Hunt gang didn't have, as far as I'm aware, a Wild Hunt gang isn't something that's been in the game before. Neither is a chemist cult, as far as I can tell.
I think they're all new.
And the way they give them specific fighter profiles, that's curious because if you can only use Wild Hunt fighter profiles in a Wild Hunt gang, I'm hoping that's just me misreading it. I'm making an assumption of that's how it is because that's how it's worded on the screen, that you could use, that hopefully you can use Wild Hunt fighters or chemist cult fighters in any Escher gang. Because otherwise that suggests
I don't think that's
I would be
be
very concerned if it was the case that Wild Hunt fighters could only be using the Wild Hunt gang. Wild the way it's written, the only things so far that have that are the Wild Runners, who we showed earlier, which were the other type of Escher Jew with the pets and the bow and arrows. If that's sold in the big Escher box, but now half the miniatures in that box can only be used in a special type of gang, that's not great. So I don't know what. I'm very curious as to what this means in terms of the Wild Hunt fighters and the Chemist Cult fighter profiles, and if they are specifically looked to a gang, which would make sense. But then that kind of suggests that big box of all the Escher models is actually nowhere near as helpful as it used to be, and if they're now locking out certain miniatures. I am hoping that my hope is, because in the fighter profile section they've got Wild Hunt, Chemist Cult, and Escher. I'm hoping that means that they are different specifics. If you pick a Wild Hunt gang list, you might get additional rules. Or if you pick a chemist cult, you might get additional rules.
Yeah, and it might be using some of the same models. So I think your Wild Hunt fighter profile might be the same, bow and arrow model from the big box of Escher, but it'll have a specifically different profile to it. And the other thing I was going to speculate on, is it in fact going to be profiles for some of these models? Because these models from the new Necromunda Skirmish, Warhammer Necromunda Skirmish core set have rules specifically in the box, but are they anywhere else? are the profiles for these appearing in either the Underhive book or the journals? That's
my
what I'm not
stance
sure.
on that.
Is one of these the Wild Hunt or the Chem
No.
Cult?
My stance on this is that these miniatures are just new gang. These are just new models. This is not a new type of. They are referred to as the blades of the matriarch.
Oh
In
yes,
the description,
they are.
which I personally think is just their way of making them sound different and new, or that's just what they are in that box. They have a preset gang roster with preset upgrades, and that's who they are. Otherwise, I look at this as these are just new models. These are just new Escher miniatures,
just
which are more
ones.
dynamic. They can just use it. They are not specific. I think my assumption is that there is a version that this preset loadout is referred to as the Blades of the Matriarch, and the Blades of the Matriarch have specific rules, so you can play against the Forge Smelters, who are the Goliath ones in the box. So you can play against each other with those specific loadouts, but ultimately they're just Escher and Goliath miniatures.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
That's my assumption. Because if I had to take an assumption from what's in the Escher book, and that's purely all it would be, because when they talk about like the chemist cult fighter profiles, that could just be the Escher chemist.
Yeah.
Because the Escher chemist, the chemist is not listed in the Gangs of the Underhive, and it's also not listed in the Dramatis. What's it called?
Persona.
The Dramatis, no, not Dramatis Persona. The hangers-on section of that. Because what is listed is the Shiver and the Chem Dealer, which are different. The Chem Dealer was more generic, and that wasn't in the Escher book, but the Shiver was. The Shiver was a weird one, which was like a Escher mystic who could, like a mystic character, which did have a miniature. You could use them to, like, your gang leader could go to the Shiver to get their fortune told, and then that could have them some bonuses or negatives on the next mission you played. But that character is listed. That hanger on is listed in as part of the PDF that's going to be downloaded, whereas the Escher Clan Chemist isn't listed anywhere there. So the Escher Chemist, in theory, would be in this book somewhere. So that could be what they refer to as the Chemist Cult figure rules. One for the Chemist Cult photo profiles, that could be where the Chemist is, but equally it could be something completely different that you're theming around. That's what these are about.
And I feel like they've not done I'm excited to see how it's going to appear. It feels bad that they've not done a great job of explaining this, like in these promotional articles, and I feel like they've kind of undercooked their promo for Necromunda. Like, we've had a few different articles that haven't really gone into much detail. They've been quite vague about what the rules are, like the changes for the rules and stuff, and they've been, as you said, vague about what's in the actual books beyond giving us, a contents list, which is, leading to people like us speculating about what's actually in them. And I'd much rather they say, well, yeah, this, these models from the new book, the new box set, they're in the Underhive journal, or they're in the Underhive book, for example. And then, just tell us exactly what's sort of in these things, obviously without, necessarily showing us everything. But it'd be good to have a bit more clarity around them. That's for sure. Is there anything else you want to say on Escher before we have a quick look through the Goliath minis?
No, nothing else to say on Escher.
You'll smash everyone with your gas nonsense.
The Tox. I've only ever played as one gang in Necromunda, and it's been Escher. And the kind of fun shenanigans you can do with the chems was a lot of fun. To the extent I had to, you as a good player, you have to. Well, I found that I was having to self nerf myself and doing things like, I'm not going to keep using the torrent ability on the flamethrower, so it can just go like an additional 12 inches across the board. I'm not going to do that because that's a bit too much. But you could do some really fun stuff with it that I really enjoyed. But anyway, on to the Goliaths. Yeah,
so the Goliaths give us a bunch of minis, what are they calling them here? The Goliath Forge bosses, the Sunproc, as well as Brutus leaders, champions with a variety of industrial style weapons. So I think, and then front and center is the Forged Tyrant, massive without even any armor, and a double-ended chain axe known as a Renderizer, which I guess is this guy, because he's not got much armor on. The Goliaths are very sort of Mad Max inspired, especially with the sort of skull detailing on the weapons and the belts and stuff. But they're very cool. Second guy's got like a heavy flamer with an eye patch on and a mini mohawk. Then we've got a very small guy who's almost Juve-like because he's not as roided up as the others, but he's got like a sort of an axe there. Then you got the Sumproc, which is like a crocodile with some chem enhancements on its back. Then we've got another small guy, but with a massive hammer. See, that's a big hammer, unlike the tiny Escher
That
hammer.
is a much better camera, you're right.
And then we've got a guy with like a gas mask on and a metal mohawk and a gun for an arm, which I guess is maybe some kind of flamer type thing. I can never remember what nozzle that weapon sort of denotes. Kind of looks like a chem thrower or something if I was hazard a guess. Have you got any idea what it might be?
I was trying to figure out what that is, and I'm guessing my guess is it's like not a chem thrower, but it could be like a welding torch or something.
Oh yeah,
I'm guessing some kind of short range laser or melter or something. It's not,
because they're a bit more industrial, furnace-y based. Yeah, because it doesn't feel like it's got any kind of canisters that would denote it's a flame weapon, but the nozzles are very flame-esque. Yeah. Then we've also got another champion or leader with a power claw arm, and then another croc, which looks very similar to the first one. Is it the same? Yeah, I think that's the same one, and they've just reused the pose. So unlike the Fear Cats, where you're getting two with the Sunbrock, so you're getting the same one basically. And then there's just some alternative angles of those miniatures as well. So yeah, they're pretty cool overall. The aesthetic matches very much the original.
I love the Crocs.
Yeah, they're big.
The Crocs are awesome.
That does look like it's on a huge base, to be fair. So they're cool in concept. It is interesting that they are just like crocodiles with some extra eyes and some more armor and some plugs, basically. Whereas the Fear Cats feel very sort of uniquely designed in comparison. But yeah, these models are cool. What do you think of the skinny Goliaths, like the almost like Juve-esque?
I've been having to quickly remind myself of some of the House Goliath lore, and I'm assuming these might be unborn Goliath.
Oh yeah, I think so. Did they talk about them down here? Unborn docs, it says.
I wasn't sure if they were either supposed to represent like female Goliath, but they looked smaller than the female Goliaths in the new box.
Yeah.
So my guess is that these might be to represent unborn Goliaths, which is those who are not naturally created to be these giant Hulk-like figures. These are just ordinary dudes who are like saying, "Yeah, I want to join House Goliath," and then they pump you full of chemicals,
right?
Or you just to work out harder. But equally, it's quite interesting having like a smaller, muscular dude. So I'm not sure what they're supposed to be. He's more
generically proportioned. Like he feels more like just a jacked guy, like a Cat-chan would look. Whereas everyone else is ridiculously proportioned. Yeah. There's a certain part of the aesthetic of Goliath that I really like, but they also look quite goofy at the same time. I can't put my finger on exactly what it is. So yeah. Whereas actually this looks more sort of true scale and realistic in comparison to the bigger guys. So yeah, I do quite like the
in that one you've got the little guy who's got the big axe,
the big hammer,
or the big hammer. So I was like, "Can you lift that, mate?"
I guess
he looks half the size of the other dude.
Yeah, the guy. They're much smaller. Yeah, if you were to have them, lined up correctly, he would be a lot smaller, which is maybe good because it's sort of giving you a bit of it's showing you the actual size of the Goliath guys that are really big in the Goliath gang itself, and not just when they're lined up facing another gang where it just looks like, the models are different sizes because of scale creep or whatever. It's not that. It's like, no, these are just big guys, even for other members of their own gangs. So yeah, this is cool and interesting. And they get, again, a Hive journal with this time the two bits of artwork we'd seen previously, this time front and center and to the right, not the two either side. I don't know who this dude is on the left, but he looks suitably creepy, like some gnarly old war vet or something, or gang leader maybe, that's due to retire. He looks very cool. And again, called House of Chains, which is the name of the current House of book for Goliaths. And then in terms of what they've got, so you've got your lore story, again talking about the Aramphian succession and a bunch of other stuff. And then, for their gang list, you've got furnace brutes and unborn gangs. So it almost sounds like you can have a gang maybe completely made up of the unborn, so the little guys, which is interesting because we don't have many of the miniatures. Like you've got some of those Juve-esque ones and then a few that we've just seen above. So yeah, maybe. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how this would work as a sort of a standalone gang in its own right. And I wonder what the furnace brutes would be, for example. Is that just big guys only, or the really big guys that you can get models of, but of which you can get like 2? So I don't know how that works. And yeah, you get muscle skills for Goliath, but then you also get territories and side jobs along with your gang tactics and stuff. And I guess gang tactics is also gonna there's gonna probably be cards for those that you can buy separately. But then they'll also be here if you don't have cards and you want to just roll for them, I guess. So that's quite cool. I think, overall, I think these, the journals are sort of exciting. It'll be interesting to see how they actually shake out and once people have got their hands on them, what they make of them. If they'd have rather everything for Goliath to be in this, which in my mind sort of would have made sense, but maybe would have.
It might well be.
Some people more feel bad in terms of because people are going to have, because to me the Underhive book feels like a bit of an index, and they did the Underhive book originally and then did replace them with House of books eventually, but that was over years. Whereas it feels like it might be they're pushing out the Escher and Goliath very quickly. If they're doing this for every single gang at the same rate, so maybe we're going to get one gang a month, that'd be insane to see. But maybe they are trying to push these out as quick as possible, or it might be they're going to do them much like in Old World, where they almost do 2 at a time, where they go, here's like an army box set with both gangs in, like you could get with both armies, like you got your Bretonnian and Tomb Kings, for example, and then there's some corresponding journals for it. And I think for a while they were doing that with other army boxes and again corresponding journals, so maybe they'll do that and it'll be sort of paced out a bit more, but these ones are coming straight away because it ties in with the core box set.
I mean, it could be. We while we have seen these, we don't know when they're going to be released.
Oh, that is true.
And it does feel a little bit, to your point, it does feel a little bit quick to be, especially as it's like, here is a new box. In this new box is new Escher gang models, new Goliath gang models. And you need to then buy the gangs, the Underhive, to get the rules for them. And then potentially a month later, there is now more models and more rules for Escher and Goliath. That does feel like I don't want to say like a lot, because it's also good to have momentum behind the edition.
Yeah, but I mean, the box isn't even out yet. Like, it's on pre-order.
Well, yeah.
I think it isn't even out this week. It's the following week. So there's still a way for it to go before the generic public's got their hands on it, and they're already sort of showing us what's next.
Well, I think it's this weekend it's coming. It will be, as in this coming weekend. So in theory, when people are listening to this, it will have been released. The core box will have been released. Necromunda will have been released. Because that's
maybe. I thought we still had another week to go, but I've not really been keeping count.
You've got the tab open, Phil. It is this weekend. It launches this weekend.
Oh, okay.
It launches this coming weekend, which, for the sake of
being
right,
specific, yes,
is August 15th.
Yeah, you're right. A good point. Okay. I should.
I think that is one of the interesting. Well, I ordered both books, so I could just know as much about Necromunda as I can. But what is interesting is that either because they haven't had the bandwidth or the information to do the Warhammer community articles in as much depth with stuff like these journals, it's talking about, here's like the kind of territories they'll be using, or the side jobs. Well, that doesn't mean anything yet, because I don't know. You haven't told us what that means.
Yeah, well, I think in one of the articles, the side jobs are the sort of secondary missions you can be trying to accomplish in your generic mission. A bit like in 40k, you've got your primary mission and then you get your secondaries.
I think number.
And did they call it the skills?
No, I do remember
side jobs. Yeah, the side job is like your own custom sort of mission that you'll be doing to theme your missions a bit more. But the issue I have with that, much like in older editions of 40k, I think it was like in 8th edition, where you had your own sort of things you could complete for victory points. If Goliath and Escher come out now, and they can do their own side jobs, but everyone else is playing with the generic pack, that might feel unfair, especially if the custom gang specific ones are maybe easier to do. Hopefully they're not, and they're all balanced, but you're not necessarily playing on the same playing field if people get sort of unique stuff and access to it while everyone else is still waiting for theirs, and that they've not given them to you or any of them in the Underhive books, because I'd assume not.
That will be interesting to see how. I mean, hopefully it suggests that there will be enough of those kind of things for the generic gangs to use in the meantime.
Yeah, but it's sort of not fun that you go, I'm going on I'm going on a generic raid, whereas my Escher pal, you, is going on some chem factory hunt or something. And it's like, you get to do the fun, interesting stuff when I'm doing the generic stuff. And
that'll serve you right for doing Chaos Helots.
Yeah, maybe they won't ever get their own. Yeah, I guess maybe I'd need to just go on, a Goliath or something, go on the mainstream and rather than the weird gangs, I guess. That'll serve me right. Cool. Yeah, should we wrap this up? Have you got any sort of final thoughts or anything you want to say?
I'm really looking forward to. I think the new minis, both for Escher and Goliath, look really cool. I'm less into the Goliath ones because they kind of freak me out a bit too much with all like the body modifications. So it's a little bit much for me. And then someone's like, "Oh, why you been Necromunda for? Then you was." But I have a greater attachment to the Escher because I've been playing them for a couple of years now. So I think they're really cool. I'm really excited for the new edition of Necromunda. I can't wait to get my hands on the new rules and start playing it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, hopefully once we get our hands on the rules, hopefully it'll be good, basically. But we'll have to wait and see on that personally. But obviously people have got review copies out and been talking about it, but haven't had a chance to really look into that yet. But yeah, thank you again for coming on, Richie. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get you on for the next episode as well.
Nice. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
No problem. And with that, we will go on to the next part of the show with a transitional noise. Hello, everyone. And in this part of the show, we're joined by special guest, Tim. Hello, Tim. How's it going?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm pretty good. It's thankfully nice and cool in the shed this morning because it's the morning and not the afternoon. But yeah, in this part of the episode, we're talking about the Undergut Mawtribes in terms of like a paint scheme that you've devised, Tim. This is mostly your segment. You've been in charge of this one, so I'm going to let you talk now and lead us through on this merry journey of painting recipes.
Well, a scary thought. I now have the reins. It's like the first time ever. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So a little bit of background. Like, I have quite a lot of fun looking at various recipes or looking at various models and trying to work out how people have gone about painting these models. I tend to sort of lean towards I'm going to put in quotes here, the heavy metal style. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm painting it to a heavy metal standard because I am not that good. I know how to hold a paintbrush, but I am no way a heavy metal painter. And so I try and devise a nice kind of happy medium of, like, I like to paint to what I think I call a parade ready standard, and just push it that little bit more and try and get closer to more of a heavy metal style. However, as I just said, it's not heavy metal per se, it's just trying to do that little bit extra. So these paint recipes are not necessarily quick. So don't look at these and like, oh, this is going to be a real quick scheme to do. Some might be more than others. It really depends on how many textures a model has and how many layers and glazes and highlighting and how much effort you really want to put into it. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to kind of pick subfactions that don't really get the limelight that much and sort of go through the kind of recipes that I've come up with, all the different textures for that subfaction.
Nice. That's quite good. Yeah, because the underguts are sort of like, they feel more like the death version of ogres.
Yeah, kind of. So yeah, let's do a little bit of background. So ogres at the moment are the hot topic. Me and Phil obviously got the box set and we are very much enjoying it. But in the new book, there are actually some subfactions that have not made it through to this book. And that is the Underguts. The Underguts have been within the realms since the Beastclawed Raiders book, I want to say, if not before, maybe even Warhammer Fantasy times. No, not Warhammer Fantasy times. Definitely definitely since the start of AOS, I would say, when they got their first book. Anyway, sorry, babbling on. The Underguts actually reside in the realm of Ogor, and they tend to have an obsession over explosives. So if you find any of the old images, which there are not a lot of, they normally have all the old lead belchers in them, I believe.
Okay.
You know, the ones with like the blunderbuss cannons kind of thing.
Yeah, the cannons, yeah.
Yeah. And that's because they kind of reverse engineered old Dwarden technology to make all these like artillery pieces and stuff. So they're kind of depicted as having like a green sort of paley kind of flesh color to. And the image I've used on this slide is not the one from like one of the old battle tomes, which does have an Underguts image in it. This was actually off the community website. And it's kind of like, oh, maybe they use this as their version of the Underguts without actually officially saying so. But also, I thought it'd be kind of cool just to sort of break this color scheme down and how I would go about it. So that's where we are with that.
And that's cool, because I thought the Underguts did appear in the book when I was looking at it a night or two ago, but literally like a page, maybe.
It might have been like a brief little snippet, but it definitely hasn't got the glow up that the other tribes have. So
yeah,
in the current book, you've got like the Maw Eaters, the Gutbusters, and then you got like the Winter Bite.
Yeah, possibly the Beast Claw
Raiders.
The Beast Claw Raiders, but there's sort of a distinction between like the Gutbusters, the Maw Seekers, and the Beast Claw Raiders, which are like archetypes. And then there's also the actual factions and the tribes themselves, even though they're often quite similar in terms of compositions, but they've got different names and different aesthetics to them.
Yeah, very much so. All very themed about which realm they reside in or the characteristics of the tribe, which I find really interesting and really cool. And that helps drive a paint scheme sometimes when I'm trying to come up with a scheme myself, because I will follow the references out there. I will see what other people have done as well. And then I like to add like my own little twist to it if I can, if I deem it's necessary. Because sometimes you can just over-engineer stuff. And it is just nice to follow the examples that have already been given to you, because there is so much theory that goes on into these recipes already. And I know a little bit of art, but I wouldn't say like I'm a master at it. So I don't really want to mess around too much.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's always easier to find someone's pre-made recipe for, say, something individual, like you've got green leather here. So you find that from somewhere, but then you're combining it with different color schemes for like the iron and the leather, for example, from other places, rather than just copying a whole complete model recipe wholesale. Sometimes you can sort of just pick and choose color recipes, and I do that often for the Citadel color app. I find quite useful, even though it's quite basic. It does give you a basic of, I want a dark metal color, or I want a dark green color. Okay, cool. What does Games Workshop recommend as a base color and a wash and a highlight? And then from there you can either copy that or adjust it slightly, depending on what you want. But yeah, I'm not someone that could necessarily go, I'm going to make this completely mad concoction. Although saying that, I think I probably have done for most of my recipes, but I think I've always sort of taken elements of someone else's and then adopted it to, maybe I've taken a gold recipe and replaced it with a bronze color scheme or something, and then just adjusted the colors and the ratios a little bit from there.
Yeah, there are many like artists out there that can do that like flawlessly. Vince Venturella is one that always comes out with crazy schemes I see with his little like infographics. I think Sam Lenz does the odd bit here and there as well sometimes. But yeah, like I'm not very good at that. What I will say is like when I try and come up with a recipe, I do try and understand the overall color theme. I'm not saying I do nail it. I'm just saying it's there in the back of my mind. So for example, with this one, there's more like green and blue tones that I've tried to keep consistent throughout all the different parts when necessary, not trying to shoehorn it in or force it. It's just something that I tried to be aware of while I continued. So before I get into it, I should say I don't make these recipes completely off the top of my head. I do follow some kind of guidance that's already out there on the internet, and I would highly recommend looking these places up. The first one is known as the Evi Archive, and that's done by a content creator called Infernal Brush. Hope I got that right.
Mm-hmm.
He was an ex heavy metal painter and has his own YouTube channel and Patreon and stuff. And it was him and I believe some other members of his community that put this sort of library together of recipes, and they do keep it updated. It may take a while for some factions to come in. So that is normally my first go-to when looking up recipes. The second place is PaintPad, and that's just a community-driven thing where people put up their various ideas or how they've gone about painting a specific scheme. And then lastly is actually like GW stuff as well. So sometimes they hit the nail on the head and you don't need to do anything too fancy. It just works. Like a classic metal recipe is good old Ed Belcher known oil as a wash, and then like Stormhost Silver as like a highlight. You can't go wrong. If you're going to do, let's say, Battle Ready plus whatever it is, not quite Parade Ready, I'd say that's like your go-to recipe. In fact, Battle Ready Plus idea. Anyway, sorry, I digress. And then following on from that, I have a whole bunch of keywords here like base, shade, recess, shade, highlight, everything. These are sort of derivatives of the heavy metal sort of fundamental terminology. There is an image out there that somebody grabbed from like a convention center, a Warhammer convention ages ago, where they had this leaflet laying out. So it is out there on the internet. I could probably give Phil the leaflet after this and he can post it up. As I said, it's a derivative. It's not exactly one-to-one copy. It's just sort of like using their terminology, again, with my little twist on it. And I will explain that as I go along. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that sounds perfect. I think you've done a good job of conveniently picking the Undergut's Mawtribe, because I was looking at that as a potential scheme purely because I saw someone else post an Underguts one on the Ogor Mawtribes Facebook group, and I sent it to you because it's sort of it looks very death themed. They look a bit like vampires because they've got blood going down their face, for example. And obviously I've already got a death army, so I was like, oh, maybe I could tie it in with them. And I am doing a slight nod to pirates and a sort of nautical ogres, and I've always had inspiration in the back of my head of the pirate LeChuck from Monkey Island.
Amazing game.
So there is a slight death crossover there as well. So maybe this is a sort of scheme I will end up stealing from you, basically. But I'm sort of still undecided about. I'm trying to get them all built first, and then I'll worry about paint scheme later. But yeah, I think this is good inspo for me. Hopefully for other people listening along as well.
Cool. Well, hopefully it will help, and hopefully everyone kind of like enjoys this little deep dive into the Undergut scheme. Segue, love point and click games. I say bring back more LucasArts humor.
Oh yeah, those were classic.
They were. Anyway, right. So let's get this show on the road. One last thing, I haven't done like an actual miniature base recipe. That's a personal and subjective. People can do whatever they want. And the only other caveat is that I did take inspiration from, what's his name? Garthy from Tale of Painters, because he does these kind of like infographic cards as well. And so that's kind of like where I got the inspiration from as well. So yeah, that's all my nods. I don't want to be like, you ripped someone off kind of thing. Anyway.
That's fair.
Okay, so first things first, prime your model with any sort of black you want. You can use Colorforge, you can use an airbrush, it doesn't matter. Just start off black. Even though we've got pale skin, later on we'll use iron rack skin, and it does cover fairly well, I found. It will take multiple layers, but you just kind of grin and bear it. So
it's because I use iron rack skin on my Nighthaunt, but I start off with a sort of zenithal, so I do black all over, and then I do like a white sort of top down spray, which is what zenithal is. I tend not to bother with like a grey mid-tone. I just sort of do the two extremes, and it sort of works well. And then I tend to completely cover it, so it's not like I'm using the zenithal as any kind of depth for showing through the base layer, but it just helps pick out the details and help see the details as I'm painting. Iron rack skin, as you said, goes over black or a zenithal quite well, I find.
Yeah, and feel free to do a zenithal if you want to. This is just kind of just keeping it simple. And I should say, like, the parts we're going to go over, this is not necessarily in order of how I'll tackle a model. It's just literally just a recipe for that specific sort of texture. It's up to you how you want to work. Some people work inside out, some people work outside in, some people go, I'll just do this bit.
Some people do like, I'm just painting a leg, and they just do everything on that leg, and then they do the next bit, which to me seems completely mad, but it makes for a more impressive social media post where you go, look at this incredibly painted leg with some freehand detail and edge highlighting on all the armor. Whereas I've painted my model blue, and that's the only stage I've got left, isn't as interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that some people just like to concentrate on something and have it completed, and they go, I feel like I've made progress. Whereas if you just paint all the base colors of everything, and that tends to be what I sometimes do. I'd be like, I'll do base colors, and I'll do all the washes and all the highlights sort of all over, and you slowly see the model progress, but it's not maybe as satisfying as completing one section at a time.
Yeah, well, that's cool. That's cool. Like, I work very much inside out, but I also just try and tackle one texture at a time to try and get consistency across the model. That's me. That's me. So, right, let's start off with what I've called pig iron then. So all kind of like the metalwork that you see around the model. We will start off with like a base of Games Workshop Iron Warrior. Again, just make sure you do multiple layers and you get a nice good coverage. Next is just a shade of the contrast paint Wildwood, and I've put a ratio of 1:1 here, which means I've thinned it down in equal parts. This for me is really just trying to find all the dents and rivets in the pig iron. Could be pink. Well, if that's the way you want to paint your model, feel free. I'm not here to judge. Yeah, and that's just act as more as kind of like a guidance, as well as kind of like a tint/film over the metal as well, to give it that weathered look.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you say 1:1 thinning, what are you thinning it with?
Oh, so me personally, I use Vallejo's glazed medium, but you can use like Lamier medium, you can use water, whatever your thinning medium.
I guess even contrast medium would probably do something similar.
Yeah, it may be. I'm not a fan of contrast medium, but it would be technically the correct one to use.
Yeah, I mean, Lamier medium also does the job because it keeps the consistency of the paint while thinning it, whereas water dilutes the paint and gives it a different consistency, which is why using something like Lamier medium, or as you said, a glazed medium, has a nicer end result than just water.
There you go, top tip. But yes, I would recommend using a medium rather than water. But yeah, so the purpose of that is, to act as a guide, just to help with the following steps, which is next kind of like your recess shade or your dark area shade. This is a mix of like Rhinox hide and Abaddon black. Again, it's just used in sort of the crevices or like sort of the recesses, or where you'll get like your lining around bolts and stuff, just to help really strengthen up those areas, just to give a bit more impression of depth to the metal.
So with the first shade, would you say that's an all-over wash, or would you still apply that more to crevices, and then the recess shade is the more extreme ones?
Correct. It's completely up to you. You can use it as an all-over wash, or you can try and place it as like a very dedicated shade. But in this case, it would just be easier to do it as like an all-over wash.
Yeah, fair.
Cool. So so once you've done that and you've like done your recess shade as well, so where your like cuts and stuff and dents are on the armor, do a highlight of lead belcher. This would be, it's up to you if you want to do it around all the edges, or just kind of like feather it around in specific places where there's raised areas on the pig iron itself. It's really down to your style. I don't edge highlight everything or highlight all the different areas. I try and just do them from, say, if the light was hitting the model from the top down, so just like the top edges, and that's just the save time. And then on top of that, I'll do like a finer edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. Again, just like picking corners or various different like segments in the highlight itself, just to break it up a little bit and make it a little bit more interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, because I find it's better to not just do a consistent line all over, which you might do, say, with like the leather or something else, because it's armor, you can almost weather it with the highlighting. So you can sort of dot it on in a few places, and sometimes you could pull the brush inwards to make like a scratch.
Yes.
So yeah, it gives it more of a weathered armor look. Whereas you could do an all over nice clean edge, like you might do with like Space Marine armor, for example, and it gives you a bit more of a factory fresh look. But for, I think, pig iron, you want it to look beaten and very worn and weathered. So being inconsistent with your highlighting helps reinforce that effect.
Yeah, it does. And then finally, you can just do a kind of like what I've called like a weathering glade, which is just dilute Rhinox hide in this case as much as possible, or as much as you feel comfortable with. And this is like an extra step to just build up sort of more dingy parts of the armor as well, or just to reinforce certain parts.
Yeah, so I guess you would just be applying this in a few little dots here and there, as opposed to all over.
Yeah, I'd probably, for me personally, I'd be putting it in the recess areas of like the bolts and the cuts and stuff.
Yeah,
just to make it look good. Like that's kind of like accumulated a bit. That's pretty much it.
Nice.
Cool. So the next part is kind of like the green leather straps that we see dotted around, holding the pig iron together. For this, we'll do a base coat of Lauren Forest mixed with iron axe skin. That's just a 1-to-1 ratio. Again, you just want your nice base coat here, making sure it's like completely opaque and you've got good coverage. Next up is, again, a shade of Lauren Forest. Much like in the previous example, you're kind of it's almost like an all-over wash again, but again, just trying to find your crevices that really help the leather to pop.
Mm.
And then on top of that, you'll do more of like a deep shade. So again, kind of like a recess shade of Lauren Forest with a bad and black. Start with 1-to-1. You may find you need to add a little bit more Lauren Forest so it's not too dark, but again, it's just to reinforce those deeper areas that you'll find in the texture when painting this model. And then on top of that, I would do a highlight of iron axe skin itself. In the sort of example of the image, they've kind of done it along all the edges. With leather, this is probably where I'll break my previous wall. I probably would do it along all the edges, just because that helps to sell leather a little bit more, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to go along the edges. Sometimes I'm a bit sporadic, but I tend to do, in this example, if the leather's going vertical, I would then do horizontal stripes going across every so often, just to sort of make it look a bit more worn. But yeah, there's plenty of examples of how to paint worn leather versus new leather, for example, online. So you can sort of see examples and replicate that with how you're applying the paint onto the that piece of the model.
Yeah. It just helps to create a texture.
And
then on top of that, apply like an edge highlight of Deep King Flesh as well.
Nice.
I'd probably do like a little dot highlight with this, maybe instead of more of just an edge, but again, up to the individual, just to reinforce those cracks that you see in the leather when it comes to the ogres, and just to really make them pop. Next up is like the brown leather. This is kind of what they've used on the bottom of the pig iron plates, and also you could use this on like any sort of bags and pouches you might find around your ogres as well.
Sort of interesting they've given us two different types of leather, but I guess it helps vary the model up, maybe.
Yeah, I think it helps to vary the model up, and it just helps to break up as well as break up all the colors as well. So you're just not seeing green leather everywhere. Because on this model, they've used it to hold all the iron plates together, but you can also see it on the weapon as well. So maybe adding that to pouches and to hold the other iron plates up would be a bit too much. But yeah, each to their own. It's all good. So yeah, so for this one would just be Rhinox hide as a base, and then I'd do a shade of like just a bad and black just to darken it down a bit. Again, this is more like an all over tint than an actual sort of wash to find recesses, because on this part it's quite small, but if you're doing it on like a bag or a pouch or something, you may want to just reinforce those areas a little bit more and treat it more like a wash to find all those little crevices and everything else. You can always tidy up with the base coat afterwards. Next up would be sort of a chunky highlight, as it's known within the industry as like a Doom Ball Brown. Pretty much place that on all the raised areas of the leather.
Yes, but a chunky highlight's like a sort of a thicker highlight. going across, so it shows more. So when you do a highlight on top, you see both the chunky highlight beneath it, sort of in between the base and the highlight, basically.
Yeah. And then I'll do a highlight of Mornfen Brown on top of that, and then XV88 on top of that, which would be more like an edge highlight or dot highlight.
Yeah, that's a pretty classic scheme, because for most of my leather, I tend to do Rhinox hide, null oil wash, and then a Mornfang Brown highlight. So yeah, this is a good recipe.
Yeah, it is pretty much based off the standard recipe that you see. It's just swapping out the null and oil to give you a little bit more control. Yeah, pretty much. And if you, as you rightly pointed out, a chunky highlight is like your nice thick highlight where you can see the other highlights on top of that. Good example is your Space Marines.
Yes.
They love a chunky highlight. So yeah. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So the bane of my existence, and I still haven't mastered it, I feel, wood. I freaking hate painting wood. Like, just trying to pick out all the grain and raised areas to make it look good. Oh, I struggle. But I've given you a recipe anyway, so have at it and see how you get on. So we'll start off with like Fondia Brown as like a nice base, a nice warm woody base, and we'll darken that down using a shade. This would be more like an all-over wash, again, to find all those crevices of Rhinox hide. And then it's going over the laborious task, if you wish, using Fondia Brown mixed with Steel Legion Drab, just to find all those raised areas, all those bridges, and then apply a further highlight of Fondia Brown, Steel Legion Drab, and then Administratum Grey, just to make it look not so warm. Just because this is from the realm of Ogor, so the realm of shadow. So we don't want everything to be too vibrant or anything like that, and actually want it to be quite cool. And then you can use a final sort of edge/dot highlight of Administratum Grey on top of that. And that's what I believe they've done here. Maybe a few tweaks, but yeah, that's the way I would tackle it. How do you find painting wood, Phil?
I kind of come up with a recipe recently, which sort of is very sort of bog standard. I think it's using like dry. It's super simple. I think it's like dried bark. Then I think there's like I think it's a Nolan oil wash, and then a Cassanian Amishade patchy wash, which I sort of stipple all over. So there's like elements of green in it for a bit of weathering. And yeah, I can't remember what I use for highlighting. It's probably go for brown, I would have thought. And then like that's it. I tend to not go too crazy in the amount of highlights on it, purely because it's a supplementary thing on the model. As you say, it's like it's handles for weapons, or and on the Nighthorn there's sometimes, like on the Lord Executioner, it's his sort of hangman's noose, like his kind of cross above his back. So it's just like little bits of detail here. So it's not really a focal point of the model. So I tend to find you can get away with slightly undercooking the paint scheme. But as you say, this is more sort of leaning towards an heavy metal, going a bit more all out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this would be a good recipe to try.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to give it a go. Some of the wood recipes I found on the Evi archive is redonkulous.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, definitely the stuff they did for Cities of Sigmar, which is partly where I got this from, and also the Krieg stuff. Oh, it's gorgeous. But
yeah, because there's especially for cities, there's a lot of wood.
Yeah. Cool. So moving on to the Pierre de Resistance, as we shall say, the pale skin, probably the main selling feature that you'll have for this model if you're going to do this army. So kind of start off with a mix here, which would make life difficult if you're trying to keep consistency across an army. But hey, if you put the effort in, people will notice. Or you can just try and make a batch. I would probably make a batch of like the base coat, which is Rakar flesh and Deep King flesh. So you're going for like a nice pale, subtly green kind of hue. There, again, 1-to-1 ratio. Apply it all over. Nice, lovely coat there. Then get Rakar flesh itself and just sort of shade in to find the forms and shapes of the muscles, and also to help sort of get all those cracks that you see in the ogre skin as well. Then reinforce those cracks and where you see the joins between the major muscle groups. So Rakar flesh and Baneblade brown, just to really strengthen those areas. Then following on from that, I've done sort of what I've called like a glaze highlight, which is again using your base mix, so Rakoff flesh and Deep King flesh, to just sort of lighten up specific parts of the muscles. So like mainly like the raised areas. It's all subjective how you want to do it. I actually do follow sort of like a top-down rule more. So I try and just concentrate on like the top areas of like the major muscle groups. So like top of your shoulders or like top of the pectorals, mainly like catching the head or the nose or the cheekbones, stuff like that. That's where I'll probably reapply this base coat as a glaze just to sort of get that base color back that would have been tinted by like the Rakoff flesh and Baneblade brown. Next step on top of that would be just straight up Deep King flesh. I've put a 1-to-1 ratio here of using a glazed medium, and that's for control. And this is not to do every muscle sort of striation that you would see if you're doing like a really lovely sort of drawing, but more to highlight around the cuts and stuff, or just pick out those choice areas that you find around the cracks in the skin, just to elevate them a little bit more. Because you can see in the image, if you actually go to the main website and find a bigger image of this, you can see that they have done edge highlighting around all the cuts and stuff.
Yeah.
And all the little cracks. And I just think that's like crazy bonkers. Like if you've got the time, go for it. Fill your boots.
Yeah, because I think the one good thing about these new ogres, especially the gluttons that you can see here, is the detail on the skin itself. So traditionally, Games Workshop models, like the skin would just be very smooth, and you'd have like these, the bicep muscles and stuff, and you would have to highlight them, but there's no edges. So you're sort of doing these sort of circular highlights to represent the peaks of the muscles. And that's actually quite difficult to do. Whereas here, you don't necessarily need to build up that kind of volume highlight. You can instead just edge highlight all the cracks and the cuts in the skin instead, and that will do just a gooder job, I think. So yeah, the sort of the extra detail on these sculpts makes painting easier. And part of this episode, if you're watching it on the Full Look Outside podcast, I also talk about the kits in general and the detail that they go into the sprue designs. So yeah, it is a benefit having the extra detail on the model, because it makes painting, especially for skin, a lot easier, I think.
Yeah, it does. Having painting up the tyrant at the model at the moment, it's worlds apart compared to like the old school sort of ogre models with just like the basic skin. I would say I struggle with skin and just sort of organic textures in general, hence why I'm doing this army as well, to also push my painting up a little bit. And having those impressions in there has really helped. Sorry, I'm looking over at the model as I'm talking.
Fair.
So yeah, it's definitely a welcome design choice that they have done. And also, I guess, advancement in technology allows them to do that these days as well. Just a final note on this. I would probably highlight these, as I said, just like the top part as the areas, but with the cracks themselves, I would follow the more traditional method of just trying to highlight underneath the crack, like the traditional method of chipping, where you have dark bit, then light bit underneath to make it look like the light's coming from the top. I would do the same for this as well, just to sort of try and give it that more of that 3D relief and volume to it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. So for the cuts, I would just use like a Bannon Black and Corn Red. Don't know why there's another one in there, but to thin it down. Just to sort of make them stand out a little bit more and make them different from the cracking of the skin. And then for the eyelids or like the nose or like the lips, I would use Glazes of Cadian flesh tone and just build that up slowly until like the desired effect I wanted. There's no sort of hard and fast rule with it. It's all subjective. So yeah, that is how I tackle the skin. That recipe was taken a bit from the Evi archive and the actual current battle tome. And I've kind of just like tried to depict it myself and break it down.
Nice.
So yeah. So I'll be interested to see if anyone does that and what they come out with. I am tempted to do this scheme myself, but I've already started, so no.
I guess you could do like one unit or one character maybe like that. So for example, I can't remember the name. Is it? I wouldn't say it's Grenfell, but it's the pirate cannon character who's
I know the one you mean.
meant to is in the lore like a mercenary, so is traveling around a lot. So maybe you could deliberately paint them up in this scheme to represent they're from elsewhere, but then they've joined your tribe.
Yeah, agreed. I think that would be pretty cool. I might actually use it for the Morseek a lot. Ooh.
Oh yeah, that's true because they've got a very pale skin color.
Yeah,
scheme. Yeah, that would work.
And I'd want them to be different as well. Anyway, sorry, I digress. So next up, we have the black trousers. And again, this is kind of like where I try and sort of stick to that turquoisey green theme that we've got going on throughout the model. So this, we're using like a Baden back, a mix of Incubi Darkness, just as like a nice like base cloak. And then we're going to highlight those folds with just straight up Incubi Darkness. And then we're going to strengthen those folds with an edge highlight of Incubi Darkness and Administratum Grey. And then you could do a final dot highlight or like little sort of texture lines with like Administratum Grey on its own. For fabrics, I do try and do like cross-hatching sort of paint, sort of a cross-hatching marking technique. I've still yet to master it. And if I was going to darken these folds, I'll just use like straight up a Baden black just to sort of really deepen those recesses.
I was going to say you've not done a shade on
No, because it's already a dark material already. I didn't want to make it too dark, but again, that's like a personal choice of mine, so that's kind of like why I left it out. So each to their own on this. Next up, we're going to look at like the black stone that's in the mallet. Again, following on from that like sort of teal, greeny, blue scheme, trying to carry out. We've got Dark Reaper as a base this time, just to make it different from the trousers. Some people may notice, some people may not. And then you've got a shade of Incubi Darkness on top of that. Again, this is just to help out, pick out all those little dents and stuff. We would do a highlight of Incubi Darkness and Administratum Grey on all like the edges of those recesses and lines and cracks, followed up with like a highlight of Administratum Grey, and then a final highlight of, or a dot highlight of Administratum Grey and White Scar. I use multiple paints. I've tried to keep this GW based, but feel free to use whatever paint you want. So yeah. Sure. And then again, you could go back in just to re-strengthen those cracks with like a Baden black again. Completely up to you. I didn't this time because I didn't really actually see any cracks in the image. It's more just to sort of strengthen those sort of depression areas that you see in the stone. Again, personal choice. Just didn't want to make it too dark.
Fair.
So next slide, please. Thank you very much. Cool. Okay, so we'll move on to the shoes next. So I can't really see this in the image. So this is kind of like my best guess or how I would do it, which I'd start off with like a base coat of Goreford Brown, and then I'll do a shade of Goreford Brown and Rhinox Hide, again, just to find those recesses and stuff, and then a further shade of Rhinox Hide and Baden Black to really get into those cracks that you can sort of see and the real deeper inserts of where the cloth's folded together, just to sell it a little bit more. Follow that up with a highlight of Goreford Brown and Baneblade Brown, and then you could do another highlight on top of that with Baneblade Brown, and then you could do like a dot highlight of Carrot Stone on like your specific corners and edges where you deem fit. Again, I would probably just stick to where the light's going to hit it from the top. For like the juicy bit, which I think would be quite fun to paint, but also quite laborious, is the actual blood that you see dotted around the model. And you would have to be pretty brave with this because I would have painted the whole model and then done this blood glaze like afterwards. Otherwise, I think it would just look a little bit odd / funny. So we start off with a Mephiston red glaze. I don't give consistencies here because everybody has, how the ratios here because everybody has their way of doing it. So I would start off with Mephiston red as a glaze and just build that up until I was quite happy. That would sort of act as like your base glaze. And then where I want the blood to be darker, so maybe like cracks or crevices, or when it would just like accumulate on the armor or clothes or around the mouth or wherever, I would use corn red. I would probably if I was feeling fancy and I had the time, if it was like a HQ model, I would probably mix Mephiston red and corn red together and do that as like the first glaze, and then go down and gradually go down to corn red, slowly building it up over time. But yeah, building it up over time, just reapplying layers to really strengthen that. And then I'd go the opposite way and go from Mephiston Red to Evil Sun Scarlet, sort of going more towards the tips at this point, or like the top of the chin or on the lips themselves. And again, just where the sun would hit it the most, and just to bring a bit more interest to it. And then finally top it off with like an edge highlight wherever you want, maybe just like dot highlight on the end, entirely up to you, of Evil Sun Scarlet and Deep King Flesh. And that's how I'd go about the blood, which I think would be pretty fun. I don't know, what would you do, Phil?
If I was trying to speedrun it, I would just do blood for the blood god.
Of course.
I think the way you've got to apply it, and as you see in the model here, and the reason why you should probably glaze it to have more control over it, is you need that sort of tapering off and the transparency in it. So if you're doing blood for blood god, you'd have to sort of dab it on, then either get some medium or some water and like feather it out. So you're doing like a wet blend to thin it as you pull it. So you'd apply it to the top of the armor, at the bottom, the top of the bottom of the armor, and then feather it out basically, and you'd get that kind of transparency effect. And same with the mouth. So it is possible, I reckon, with blood for the blood god, but I think that requires more bravery than, as you're saying, building up slowly with glazes. Yeah, but those kind of over the top blood effects is something I've always wanted to do, but I don't think I've ever done it on any of my models. I think I maybe tried it once and I maybe didn't like the effect. I can't remember. So yeah, I think on these guys it looks really good. So it'd be fun to do.
I think it does as well. I've never tried it myself. I'm still dubious about trying it. I may do it right at the end.
As you say, it's... Yeah, I've always had this sort of issue with other weathering effects that I've wanted to apply to certain models, or like freehanding iconography and stuff, where I've painted the model, it's kind of finished and it looks really good. And then I get the fear of I'm going to muck it up by doing this extra step. So I tend to park it. And then often sometimes I'm painting for an event as well. So I've got like a time deadline. So that is something I'll maybe not have time to do. And then I always think to myself, I'll get back round to that later on. And then I never do. So yeah, I think it would, but I think it really elevates the model. I think if you didn't have the red in there, it would look very bland and very, too cool and dark. Whereas the red gives it the contrast and the pop of the color.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's sort of essential for this scheme to try and do it, because everything else is so dark.
Agreed. I think it will really help sell the models and just make you stand out from maybe all the other ogres that will be out there on the tables if you were looking to get in the cabinet. But it would be
even
laborious.
the standard tribe, they've got the red fist.
They do.
And that looks really good as well. Just that sort of pop of blood on one part of the model works really well. So whether it's the mouth and the belly plate here for the underguts, or if it's for, the standard tribe, which name I can't remember, that extra sort of pop of colour for the blood does just look really cool on the ogres.
Yeah. Segue, I think it's like the Boulderhead tribe. They actually have like black areas where the blood is, because they burnt the blood off in sort of like a rebellious action against the Moorseeker tribe and following the Moorseeker path. Anyways, sorry, I digress.
Nice.
So yeah, moving on. I forgot about the white cloth, so apologies there. But the way this would be done is that we would start off with a base coat of Rakarth Flesh and Grey Seer, just a 1-to-1 mix. And then I'll just do a wash of like Skaven Blight Dinge. Again, just finding the other crevices like you would with the leather. I would actually then do a tidy up of using Rakarth Flesh and Grey Seer. Kind of like almost like a highlight as well, but just sort of re-strengthening those folds back up. And then the highlight its actual self would just be Rakarth Flesh, Grey Seer, and like add a little bit of white to it. There's no reason to go OTT on the white cloth, as we've already gone OTT on everything else. And so it's kind of nice to just have like a simple element here and there, but up to you. That's how I'll do it. And so the final bit I thought I'll do a little nod to the original undergut skin recipe that I found in the Destruction Battle Tome book, which I think was like 2019, and do my little twist on it. Not too much, but the way they did it was you would have a base coat of Ironrack skin, and then they did a shade of Drakenhof Nightshade to help build up those volumetric shapes. I would probably go a little step further and just do a recessed shade or a deeper shade of like Incubi Darkness, just to help really sell those volumetric shapes. And then they did a glaze highlight of like Deep King Flesh, so like your circular highlights that we mentioned a little while ago. And then finally they finished it off with an edge highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh. And apparently that's how they did it back in the day.
Nice.
Yeah. So there you go. That is how I would go about painting up the Undergut's Mawtribe.
Yeah, well, brilliant. Very detailed. And
very convoluted.
People can paint it base it however they want, I guess. But yeah, paint scheme, you've pretty much covered everything. So yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I'd be quite tempted to try it out myself. Yeah, I'll have to let you know if I do. And if anyone else does, let us know down in the comments. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say, Tim, before we head off?
Not really. Well, no, not really. But it has kind of made me think of doing like a Battle Ready Plus now, where it's like you just do a base, a shade, and a highlight, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. It would be quite easy to streamline this down if you wanted to by just not doing some of the highlights, or maybe not doing the deeper shades, for example, and just doing like a base shade highlight would be quite easy to do. But yeah, well, thanks very much for coming on and putting this all together. Anyone can check out Tim on Instagram, fickle_brush, which is where you can see what he's been painting, assuming he's been posting lately.
Not lately, but I will be.
But yeah, post up some pictures of your tyrant model that you've been painting so people can see. Yeah, so thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll get on with the next part of the show, transitional noise. After the last episode where I said we had run out of 5-star reviews, I did discover there was a couple hiding out on YouTube. So I'll go through one of them this week, and there'll be a couple more as we go along over the next few weeks. But by all means, feel free to leave a 5-star review down in the normal places, whether that's on YouTube or iTunes predominantly, or Audible. So this one is from episode 237 from Character Building 89, 5 stars. Philip takes us through all things hobby, models and lore, and we are in the present all talking nostalgia. Always worth tuning in to find out. So yeah, thank you, Character Building 89. Greatly appreciate the comment. Glad you enjoy all the gamut of things to talk about, hobby, models and lore, which we've almost completely done in this episode. I don't think we've done too much on lore, but there's been an occasional lore chat here and there. And glad that you like us talking about old stuff as well as new things as well. They're both dear to my heart. So yeah, thank you very much for the comment. And like I said, if you would like to be like Character Building 89, you can leave us a 5-star review wherever you can find a place to do it. And if you would like to support Lookout Sir even further, you can like and share the videos or the podcasts around with your friends. You can leave a comment. You could subscribe over on YouTube, which would be greatly appreciated. You can buy merch from Red Level, and you can also support us over on Patreon, where you'll also find some exclusive content. There's been a couple of new Transitional Noise episodes for even more Lookout Sir content. You can find it all over there. And with that all out of the way, we can get on to the cozy section of the show, the outro. Transitional noise. Welcome to the outro, where we can have a little chat about the hobby roundup and also what I've been getting up to. I think it's worth first talking about what I've been doing over on Lookout Sir and over on YouTube. So obviously, since Dan left the show, I've been moving over to a video format to try and keep things a bit more interesting, but also it seems like in terms of the general podcast world, video format seems to be where people are at. And previously, I've sort of experimented with taking individual segments and putting them up on YouTube as a standalone video, but I've been doing that over on my Beyond the Tabletop channel. But I've sort of decided that I think for Beyond the Tabletop, I want that to be more a dedicated hobby space where I'm talking about kit bash conversions, because that's ultimately what that channel was more known for, rather than sort of lore videos and things like that, which is where I had put some of the Crusade stuff up there. So instead, what I've been doing is what I've been calling mini-sodes, because a 30 to 40 minute video is still quite long. It's not a short, but it's a mini episode for Lookout Sir, at least. So the last episode I've cut up and put out individual sections over on the Lookout Sir YouTube channel this time, rather than Beyond the Tabletop. So for someone that doesn't like the long format 3-hour video, because when you see a thumbnail that has 3 hours attached to it, it's quite daunting, whereas a 30-minute video might be a bit more palatable to people. So I've been experimenting with those. So if you don't like the full podcast experience, you could just watch the individual segments over on there. Much more bite-sized, much more easier to share with people. Please do give them a watch. It'd be great to see the channel grow in general. And I think a shorter format might help. But obviously, I'm still wedded to the podcast idea, which will be a collation of all of those segments in one place. Plus, you get the intro, plus you get the 5-star review, and plus you get this special outro, which you won't be getting if you just watch those individual mini-sodes. So by the time this video is out, there would have been 4 mini-sodes talking about each of the individual sections that I recorded in the last episode. So that's what I've been doing over on YouTube. Hobby-wise, as you can see, there's been a bit of a game that happened. Tim came over earlier in the week and we played some Age of Sigmar. We didn't get to finish the game completely, but it was fun to try out the new General's Handbook. I would say the General's Handbook core mechanic is quite clunky and sort of slows the game down quite a bit. It's just extra mechanics to keep track of. And I sort of feel like the last General's Handbook didn't really have that. It was just a bunch of really interesting missions. So yeah, I feel like I'm not really keen from my first game of the extra mechanics that the General's Handbook has, because ultimately you have to keep track of your like Fury level and also the number of Fury tokens that you have, both worded quite similar, but 2 distinct separate things that you need to keep track of throughout the game, and how you spend them. There's also different ways of doing that. But the game was good. Tim won. We didn't quite get to finish, but he had to call time because he had to get home back to his new baby. But yeah, that was fun. Great to use the mat finally, try out some of my terrain, albeit unpainted, so I do need to get around to doing that at some point. And what else hobby-wise? I've obviously been going all in on the Ogor Mawtribes lately, so I've been building all the models. So I've got one of the Gluttons here, and I'm currently building the Iron Guts, which I've not finished because I'm sort of planning on converting those up. I want to make them a bit more nautical themed, so I'm currently scratch building an anchor out of plasticard. It's currently in a very basic shape at the moment, but I'm hoping that that will be a suitable weapon replacement instead of the sort of swords and halberds that they've got, because I like this sort of pirate nautical aesthetic that the ogres are going to have for my army. So that's what I've been doing hobby-wise at the moment. And then at the time of recording, it's Wednesday. Tomorrow will be Thursday, and I'll be going to Newport, which is where a big Warhammer official gaming event will be happening. Some people will be taking part in tournaments. People will be taking part in the Grand Narrative 40k. I guess it's a campaign. That's what I'm doing. Richie and our buddy Spike are doing the 40k Grand Narrative, which will be really interesting. And then Tim and Dan are taking part in the Age of Sigmar Grand Tournament. So by the time this episode is out, we'll be living it up in Wales doing that, basically. That should be a very fun, sociable time. I think even Joe from the podcast from way back will also be joining us with a bunch of his friends as well. So I think there'll be a good group of us out and about. So yeah, next episode, we'll be all talking about that. I've also got some other segments already lined up to film for that as well. So I'll try and shoehorn that in as well. I'll just see how I get on. I'm going to keep this outro brief just because I've got to get this whole episode edited together in time, of which there's quite a few segments, and I've got to get it all done before I go away tomorrow. So I'm a bit pushed for time, and I also still need to come up with my list for the Grand Narrative. I know I'm taking my Thunder Warriors, which, as I always say, I'm running as my Custodies. It's 1,000 points, but you also get 500 points as a sidebar to add on. So you have a total of 1,500 points to play with between missions. So you can swap out units so you can have a bit of variety, but you also have to have a 500 points doubles list effectively. So if you end up teaming up with someone, you can take 500 points each and do a doubles game against someone else. So I've still got to finalize those lists. It's probably going to be a similar list to what I always take because that's what I've been enjoying. That's what I've been finding works well. I probably do just need to decide on my final detachments because ultimately, as I've been saying in previous episodes, that dictates what the dispositions are and ultimately what my missions are going to be. So I need to settle on which detachment's going to give me the play style of primary mission that I want to actually be doing. So I need to sort of double check those and make a decision. So I've also got that to do tonight as well. So yeah, that's all the hobby stuff that I can think of lately. And yeah, next episode, hopefully we'll be talking about our experiences away at Newport. So yeah, thank you for watching. As always, please like and share, all that usual stuff. It's always greatly appreciated, especially, when people message me or leave comments. It's very encouraging and, helps me motivated to keep doing more content for you lot to listen to. And I hope you've enjoying it. That's all for this episode. Until the next Lookout Sir episode, or unless you're going to be watching some of the mini-sodes, which would be a little bit odd because the mini-sodes coming out in the next week will be from this episode. But maybe you want to just watch it twice. Help the old algorithm out. Great. So yeah, so until next time, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.